Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jennifer Brown. Jennifer Brown, born in 1979, is an energetic and vibrant woman. She has the ability to spread positive energy to those around her through her optimistic attitude and way of life. People who know her often wonder how she can do so much and still maintain such a positive spirit. But in fact, her positive energy comes from being a mother, a role that she always loves and cherishes. She and her son Noah have a special relationship. Although no one knows about Noah's father, it does not affect their lives. Jennifer became stronger after Noah was diagnosed with autism. She has become a strong support and best friend to her son. The relationship between Jennifer and Noah is known and admired by everyone. They spend a lot of time together, share happy moments and support each other when needed. The small town also loved the family for their cheerfulness and kindness. However, no one could have predicted Jennifer's disappearance. On January 3, 2023, she disappeared without a trace. The next morning, the Limerick Township Police Department received a missing person call from Antonio Blair Watts Richardson, a close friend of Jennifer's. Although it had been less than 24 hours since he last saw or heard her voice, his anxiety was growing. Blair Watts had been trying to contact Jennifer for hours without success. All his attempts went unanswered. This behavior was completely unlike her, as she was a responsible person who always answered calls or messages, especially when it came to matters related to her son Noah. However, on this day, the boy's mother did not come to pick him up after school. This made Jennifer's family and friends very worried, as they knew her to be a caring mother who always cared about her children. This sudden disappearance made everyone feel uneasy. Blair Watts' call to the police was the beginning of a long and mysterious investigation that would later affect the entire city and cause a great tragedy. After Blair Watts reported his girlfriend missing, a major search began. Police, family, and friends joined forces, hoping to find any clues that could shed light on Jennifer's disappearance. Many questions were raised, and the main one was what could have caused this caring mother to abandon her son without any explanation. At 4 p.m. that afternoon, Officer Stephen Crawford of the Limerick Township Police Department arrived at Jennifer's family home to investigate the situation. Upon arrival, Officer Stephen found Jennifer's car still parked on the front porch. Upon entering the home, he discovered that her keys, wallet, and tablet were still inside the home. However, Jennifer's cell phone was nowhere to be found. During further investigation, police discovered that Jennifer's phone had been turned off at 7 a.m. on January 4th and had not been located since. The phone's last recorded location was near Lewis Road and Ridge Pike in Limerick Township. This discovery was a serious sign in the investigation, suggesting that something terrible might have happened to Jennifer. Young Jennifer Brown is missing and the police have begun an investigation. Investigators have questioned her family, friends, and neighbors, hoping to find information about her disappearance. However, no one has been able to provide useful information. Aunt Diane Brem and Jennifer's friends Tiffany Barron and Blair Watts are convinced that Jennifer would never have left alone. The reason is that she could not leave her son. She was a loving and devoted mother. All efforts by authorities and volunteers have been fruitless. They have not found any trace or clues to Jennifer's whereabouts. Her loved ones have appealed to the public through the media for information about her disappearance. A reward has been offered, but to no avail. Jennifer Brown's disappearance has left both investigators and her family with many questions and concerns. The police investigation has begun to examine every detail of the day she went missing. Blair Watts, the last close friend to see Jennifer alive, has come forward to share her story. On a typical January afternoon, Jennifer and Blair Watts chatted intimately in the warm living room about life, future plans, and their children. The two families' children often played together, and Jennifer asked Blair to pick up Noah from school so they could enjoy the evening together. This was normal for them because they were close friends. However, the next day, when Blair Watts went to pick up Noah from school, things took a strange turn. Noah was behaving erratically and the teachers were worried. They discovered that Noah had missed 2 important doses of medication to help control his illness. Jennifer was a very caring and nurturing mother. So when she did not contact the school about Noah's situation, everyone was surprised. School officials searched for information about Jennifer and discovered that she had left home to go to the grocery store but did not return as scheduled. This was very unlike Jennifer, who was always worried and concerned about her children. This incident made everyone even more worried. Jennifer's friend, Blair Watts, tried to contact her but was unsuccessful. When she did not receive a response, Blair Watts decided to check if Jennifer had picked up her son at the bus stop. However, when Jennifer did not appear, Blair Watts became concerned and decided to report the incident to the police. After the report, no new information about Jennifer's whereabouts emerged. Hopes of her return faded. It seemed that Jennifer had disappeared without a trace. However, on January 18th, 2 weeks after the disappearance was reported, 2 employees working in a warehouse near Roseford discovered a newly dug hole. When they investigated, they discovered the body of a woman buried in a shallow grave. The workers immediately notified the police, who went to the burial site. After an autopsy, the police identified the young woman as Jennifer Brown. The sheriff contacted her family and informed them that Jennifer's body had been discovered near a warehouse in Roseford. Jennifer's autopsy revealed that she had died from abuse and asphyxiation. She also had 3 broken ribs, indicating that she had struggled with her attacker before she died. This evidence changed the nature of the investigation, and the missing person case was upgraded to a homicide case. The police began questioning people close to Jennifer, including her family and friends. However, these interviews did not yield any new information, and the police have yet to find a suspect. The investigation seemed to be at a standstill as no new evidence emerged. But surprisingly, the police received important information from Noah's former teacher. After Jennifer was reported missing, the police asked anyone with information to contact them. This call caught the attention of a former teacher of Noah, who decided to come forward to the police. A teacher recalled Jennifer's case, which initially seemed trivial but raised suspicions after the verdict. The teacher said Noah shared with her a key piece of information regarding the incident that occurred on January 4th, the day Jennifer went missing. Noah told her that when Blair Watts picked him up from the bus stop on January 3rd, he saw his mother's personal cell phone in Blair Watts' pocket. He immediately recognized the phone because a childhood photo of himself was displayed on the lock screen. This became the key to the investigation into Jennifer's murder. The police had previously assumed that the killer had taken Jennifer's cell phone, but Blair Watts now became the prime suspect. As they delved deeper into the relationship between Jennifer and Blair Watts, hidden secrets began to emerge. This surprised the investigators. On the surface, the relationship between the two seems very close and understanding, and their families also interact frequently. However, when looking closely at the business transactions, the seemingly simple initial relationship turns out to be hidden under a layer of long-standing hatred. In fact, this friendship is closely tied to their business, and that creates unpredictable conflicts. What's more special, people have discovered disputes stemming from that relationship. For example, the breakdown of the business left Blair Watts with emotional conflicts that were difficult to overcome when the Bird's Kitchen store itself was closed in January 2022. After approaching Jennifer, in August 2022, Blair Watts received an offer of help. Jennifer decided to invest in his business to help revive Bird's Kitchen at a new location. Under the agreement, Jennifer would provide financial support to the restaurant every 6 weeks or so. Between August and January, Jennifer transferred $36,000 to Blair Watts to rebuild the business. She also agreed to provide an additional $99,000. However, Blair used the money for her own personal needs instead of investing in the restaurant. When the property owner discovered that Blair Watts had not met her financial obligations, they terminated the lease on December 26, 2022. This left Blair Watts in a desperate situation, losing money and the opportunity to reopen the restaurant. In desperation, Blair decided to commit a serious crime to save her business. During the investigation of Jennifer's case, investigators scrutinized the financial transaction history on her iPad. They discovered 2 illegal transfers of $177,000 to Bertie's Kitchen on January 3rd. These payments were not mentioned in the official agreement between Jennifer and Blair Watts. It is worth noting that these transfers initially failed because Jennifer's iPad had two-factor authentication enabled. However, after disabling the authentication system, the transfers were successful. This led investigators to suspect that Jennifer's boyfriend, Blair Watts, may have been involved in the murder. Investigators interviewed the property owners Blair Watts had rented. They discovered that on January 4th, the same day Blair Watts reported Jennifer missing, he came to them to sign the lease, claiming he had the money. Police then conducted an interview with Blair Watts' wife, Tiara Taylor, to determine where Blair Watts had been on the day Jennifer went missing. Tiara said Blair Watts had visited Jennifer's family on January 3rd and did not return home until early the next morning. He returned home briefly, then left around 5 p.m. and did not return home until late in the evening. Further investigation revealed that Blair Watts had stayed at the home of his mistress, Tatiana Garrett, and did not see anyone else until around 8 p.m. This meant that between 5 p.m. and 8 p.m., Blair Watts had no evidence to suggest that he was not at the scene of the crime. Based on the available evidence, detectives developed a scenario for the murder. According to this scenario, on January 3rd, Blair Watts went to Jennifer's house around 1 p.m. while Noah was at school and likely killed her. After committing the crime, Blair Watts transferred money from Jennifer's iPad to his account. He then picked up Noah at the bus stop around 4 p.m. When he returned to Jennifer's house, he dropped Noah off and returned to the crime scene to dispose of the body. He took the body to a field near Roseford and buried it in a shallow grave. Blair Watts then went to Tatiana's house and stayed there overnight. However, he made a serious mistake. He let Noah see his mother's cell phone. This was important evidence that helped the police quickly find the killer. Law enforcement had enough evidence to convict, but they decided to investigate further to gather more information. To investigate further, the police requested the participation of film experts and a specially trained dog that could detect the scent of a corpse. First, the dog was brought to Jennifer's house to memorize the woman's scent. The police then led the dog to Blair Watts' car and it immediately detected a foul odor. This was the final key piece of evidence that solidified detectives' belief that Blair Watts was involved in the murder. On February 8th, after months of investigation, Blair Watts was arrested and charged with aggravated murder, and burglary. He is currently being held in the Montgomery County Correctional Facility without bail, awaiting a preliminary hearing. When Jennifer's friends and family found out she was dead, they were shocked and heartbroken. But what made them even more heartbroken was that the killer was someone they knew and trusted. Now that Blair Watts has been arrested and brought to trial, they can finally rest easy knowing that justice has been served. Tiffany Barron, a friend of Jennifer's, spoke on behalf of the family. In an interview, she expressed her feelings. She still dreams about Jennifer. Jennifer's son, Noah, keeps asking about his mother and she doesn't know how to answer. If Blair Watts is convicted after the investigation and trial, he will spend the rest of his life in prison. The case was solved thanks to the keen observation of Jennifer's 8-year-old son. He discovered Blair Watts' mistake, helps solve the case and punish the culprit. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Paige Bergfeld. Paige Bergfeld was born in Atlanta, Georgia on April 27, 1973, to Frank and Suzanne Bergfeld. She had one sibling, Craig Bergfeld. Paige grew up in Atlanta before relocating to Colorado. In 1995, she married her high school crush, Howard Ron Beigler, who was also her first love. However, their marriage ended due to disagreements about having children. While Paige was ready to start a family, Howard was not interested. Following their divorce, Paige married Rob Dixon, an ambitious businessman, in 1998. Their intense 10-year marriage resulted in 3 children, Jess, Taft, and Cole. June 28, 2007, marked the last time Paige Bergfeld was seen by her loved ones. Earlier that day, Paige had spent part of the afternoon with her ex-husband, Howard Beigler, with whom she had recently rekindled their romance. After a picnic together, they went their separate ways. Around 9 p.m., Beigler called Paige to check in on her, and she assured him she was heading home and would text him once she arrived. However, that text never came. Beigler tried calling her again the next day, but her phone went straight to voicemail, indicating it was either turned off or out of reach. This raised his concerns, and on the 3rd day, he decided to visit her apartment. What he discovered was shocking. Paige's live-in nanny informed him that she had not returned home in 3 days. Beigler immediately alerted Paige's parents and the authorities, sparking a terrifying investigation that would unfold in the days to come. Paige Bergfeld's parents, Frank and Suzanne, were devastated when their beloved daughter went missing. The police suspected foul play in her disappearance, partly because of her parents. Frank described Paige as a devoted mother who would never leave her children. Paige would go to great lengths to care for her kids, even if it meant crawling with broken limbs. Her children were her top priority, and everyone close to her knew it. Paige's brother, Craig Bergfeld, a Seattle-based plastic surgeon specializing in facial reconstruction for kids, left his home to care for Paige's children in Grand Junction, Colorado. He and his wife Claire understood that Paige's primary concern was her kids' safety and well-being, and they made that their top priority too. Seeing that Paige was a devoted and caring mother, the police were convinced that she wouldn't have simply abandoned her children and left town. They believed something must be preventing Paige from being with her kids, and they launched an investigation to uncover the truth. Mesa County Sheriff Matt Hilke began looking into the case, following standard procedure when someone goes missing. Typically, the closest people to the missing person and the last ones to see them are the first to be investigated. So the police invited Howard Beigler for questioning. Beigler was the last person to see Paige before she vanished, raising the question of whether he could have been involved in her disappearance. In an interview, Paige's father confirmed that Ron Beigler was Paige's greatest love. Paige and Ron had shared a passionate romance since high school, and after reuniting over 10 years ago, her father was certain that Beigler would never harm his daughter. Paige Bergfeld's life took a surprising turn. After marrying Rob Dixon in 1998, she fell for his charming personality. However, her father described their pre-marriage relationship as whirlwind-like. Rob's wealth from a successful business initially impressed Paige, but his post-marriage behavior became reckless, marked by extravagant spending and poor investments, ultimately leading to financial ruin. Paige took steps to improve their financial situation by starting a small preschool dance program called Brain Dance. She also began selling kitchen appliances for a company called The Pampered Chef from their home. However, Rob's spending habits canceled out Paige's efforts, causing tension in their marriage. Frank Bergfeld described Rob's unpredictable personality. While Rob could be cheerful, friendly, and lively at times, he would often become mean, condescending, irritable, and short-tempered. Rob Dixon's importance in the police investigation grew after a new discovery. Prior to her divorce, Paige had reported a threat to the police in October 2004. In a 911 call, she said Rob had threatened to kill the kids if she didn't let them stay with him, but the situation was resolved by the time police arrived. A year after the first incident, Paige Bergfeld reported another disturbing altercation to 911. She and her husband Rob had a fight, during which he pushed her to the ground while she was holding their baby, and then punched her in the stomach. This time, the police arrested Rob, but he was released after completing an anger management course. The Mesa County Sheriff's Office questioned Rob Dixon about Paige's disappearance. Rob claimed to have been in Philadelphia on the day she went missing, which was supported by the fact that he had moved there after their divorce. Despite his history of violent behavior towards Paige, Rob had a solid alibi, having been 2,000 miles away from Grand Junction at the time of her disappearance. The police did not release details of their interview with Rob to the public. Paige's father, Frank Bergfeld, realized that even someone with a troubled personality like Rob couldn't have committed murder from such a distance. Although Rob was no longer a suspect, the Bergfeld family still had concerns about him. 3 months prior to her disappearance, Paige posted disturbing content about Rob on an online message board, where she shared that her children would often ask her if their father was going to kill her. In the post, she confided that she could imagine her kids wondering what life would be like if she were actually dead. With both of Paige's ex-husbands possessing solid alibis, the police were forced to broaden their suspect search. However, after investigating those close to Paige Bergfeld, the police were still unable to find a suspect, leaving them to ponder who could be responsible for her disappearance. Ultimately, this led to a stunning revelation about Paige Bergfeld herself. Paige Bergfeld was a devoted mother with a bubbly personality, loved by her family and friends. But behind her happy family scenes, she led a secret, double life. In addition to her public roles as a dance teacher and kitchen appliances vendor in Grand Junction, Paige had a hidden online persona. After her disappearance, her family discovered something suspicious on her laptop, which they reported to the police. The subsequent investigation revealed that Paige had a second, lucrative source of income as an expensive escort. Paige used the alias Carrie online and advertised services that went beyond those of a traditional escort, including nude massages and topless encounters, as suggested by provocative internet ads. Paige's family, particularly her sister-in-law Carrie Bergfeld, were shocked to discover her secret life after her disappearance. Although her family was surprised to learn that Paige worked as an escort, they seemed to understand her reasons for doing so. Paige's love for her children drove her to take on a huge responsibility as the breadwinner and provider of her family after her divorce. Her father, Frank Bergfeld, believed that this led her to make a difficult choice. Raising 3 kids alone was a massive task, and Paige was determined to give them the best life possible. Paige's parents, Frank and Susanna Bergfeld, were surprised by the way she chose to achieve her goals. In an interview, Frank said he wished Paige had talked to him about her plans, as he would have been happy to advise her about the potential risks. Although they didn't agree with her profession, Frank and Susanna continued to love and be proud of their daughter without reserve. Craig Bergfeld, Paige's brother, shared their father's view that Paige's profession was driven by her desire to provide for her children. He was aware that her dance school and kitchen appliance sales weren't lucrative enough to cover her $6,000 monthly mortgage, let alone put clothes on the backs of 3 kids. Although he suspected she had another source of income, he never imagined she would be working as an escort. Paige's ex filed for bankruptcy after their divorce. Her brother Craig thought she'd default on the large mortgage soon. But Paige surprised him and his wife C by buying her first home with her 2 jobs teaching dance and selling kitchen equipment. C questioned Paige about her income, and Paige confessed to having worked as a stripper before her marriage. At the age of 21, Paige resided in Dearborn and was employed at the Mile High Saloon, where she earned a substantial income of approximately $400,000 monthly. According to Paige, she ceased working as a stripper upon getting married, though it appears she didn't entirely disconnect from the industry. C surmised that Paige's prior experience as a stripper likely influenced her decision to become an escort. Mesa County prosecutor D.A. Pete Hinger revealed that, despite 20 years of experience, he had never come across a case like Paige's. He found it astonishing that someone from her socioeconomic background and with her family dynamics would be involved in such a profession. Hinger acknowledged that Paige Bergfeld embodied the ideal of a responsible and devoted mother, making her double life a stunning revelation. This discovery triggered a more in-depth investigation. Paige's parents recognized that uncovering her secrets would be crucial in determining her fate. However, as much as they yearned for closure, they were uncertain if they truly wanted to know the truth. Fluky's search team made progress, but it unsettled the Bergfeld family. Craig wasn't ready to find out what had happened to his sister, clinging to hope she was still alive. Police suspected she wouldn't return, believing it tied to her secret job. The chief district attorney, Dan Rubenstein, took charge of Paige Bergfeld's case and identified a suspect, Lester Ralph Jones, a middle-aged client of Paige's escort services. Although Rubenstein was convinced that Jones was involved in Paige's disappearance, he lacked concrete evidence without her body. A major breakthrough occurred in 2012 when a hiker discovered a body. At first, the police department wasn't certain the body found was Paige's, but after conducting necessary tests, they confirmed it was her by matching her teeth and jaw. What was surprising, however, was that Paige's body had been lying in the exact spot a hiker stumbled upon it, an area already thoroughly searched by Connie Fluky's team, yet nobody had found her. The investigators theorized that the killer must have buried Paige in a grave deep enough to evade the search party. With sufficient evidence, Don Rubenstein was able to bring in Lester Ralph Jones for questioning. Although the police couldn't determine the exact cause of Paige Bergfeld's death, they were convinced it was a violent one. Paige had suffered a fractured jaw, leading investigators to believe her attacker must have severely beaten her. Additionally, remnants of duct tape were found around the corners of her mouth, and it appeared her jaw was fractured just before her death. This discovery made the items found during the search, which Connie Fluky had organized, understandable. The items included pieces of documents scattered along the highway, some of which had Paige's name, while others had her children's names. The investigators assumed that the documents must have been thrown out of the car by Paige's kidnapper as he drove her to the spot where he eventually killed her. However, another possibility was that Paige herself had thrown the documents out of the car as a way of helping people to locate her. Unfortunately, Paige's killer, Lester Ralph Jones, was able to roam free for 5 years after her terrifying murder. Given his bad reputation, it was easy to believe that he was responsible for Paige Bergfeld's death. Don Rubenstein gathered sufficient evidence against Lester Ralph Jones during the investigation. The police discovered Paige's car on the highway, burned in a fire that was believed to have been intentionally started in the passenger seat, likely to destroy DNA samples or any incriminating evidence. Notably, the driver's seat had been adjusted to fit a taller person. Although Ralph Jones denied any knowledge of Paige's burned car during interrogation, it was found just a short distance from his workshop. Given his criminal history, including a prior felony conviction, Ralph Jones's testimony was not credible. Furthermore, a critical piece of evidence implicated him. He had contacted Paige Bergfeld using a burner phone on the day of her disappearance. Despite his denial of purchasing the phone, a CCTV recording showed him doing so. Ralph Jones frequently used Paige's escort services, unaware that he was a ruthless killer. However, it was a conversation with local Sheriff Sergeant Art Smith that ultimately led to his downfall. The sheriff had confiscated 2 of Jones's vehicles, prompting an unexpected and shocking response from Ralph. His reaction was that of a man consumed by guilt. When Sergeant Smith inquired about the cars, Jones casually asked where he would bury a body. This cryptic comment, combined with other evidence, provided the crucial breakthrough the police needed. 7 years after Paige Bergfeld's disappearance, in November 2014, Lester Ralph Jones was arrested and charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. According to the arresting officers, Jones had been expecting the arrest and showed no signs of surprise. He did not ask any questions, instead calmly turning around and placing his hands behind his back. His bail was set at $2 million. In 2016, Ralph Jones stood trial, and the jury determined that although the evidence against him was circumstantial, it was sufficient to convict him. 9 years after Paige vanished, the jury delivered a guilty verdict in December 2016, finding Ralph Jones responsible for her murder and kidnapping, and he received a life sentence. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Brooke Skylar Richardson. The Richardson family consisted of Kim and Scott Richardson, who were devoted parents actively involved in their children's lives. Their son Jackson was passionate about football, while their daughter Brooke Skylar, or simply Skylar, was a cheerleader. Skylar struggled with an eating disorder, which had taken over her life from a very young age. Her mother, Kim, first became aware of Skylar's eating habits issues when she was in the 6th grade at just 12 years old. Skylar's fixation on food and exercise became increasingly apparent, such as when she refused to buy gum if it had more than 5 calories. As a flyer on the cheerleading squad, Skylar felt pressured to maintain a certain weight, which made her struggle even harder. Her obsession with her body image and the constant fear of gaining weight had consumed her. Skylar's battle with weight and body image started when she was a cheerleader. To stay at a certain weight, she began throwing up after eating. However, this harmful habit made her problems worse. After the cheerleading season ended, Skylar's struggle with her weight got even harder. She would have times where she ate too much food in a short time, known as binge eating, and then times where she would hardly eat or follow very strict diets. Skylar's parents saw the change in her behavior and were worried about her health. They tried to talk to her about it, but Skylar would shut them down whenever they brought it up. She didn't want to discuss it, and any attempt to talk about her weight was met with resistance. Frustrated, Skylar's parents looked for professional help from doctors and therapists, hoping they could help their daughter. After an evaluation, Skylar was diagnosed with body dysmorphia, a condition characterized by an obsessive focus on a perceived flaw in appearance, often leading to significant distress and impairment in daily functioning. In the summer of 2016, just before her senior year, Skylar started dating her friend's cousin. However, the relationship was short-lived, and by January 2017, she had moved on to a new boyfriend, Brandon, a high school student. At this time, Skylar seemed genuinely happy and was gaining weight. Her parents, Kim and Scott, were hopeful that her eating disorder was under control as they noticed her healthy appearance and genuine happiness. In February, Skylar chose her prom dress, a tight-fitting one that required her to be laced into it. A month later, in mid-March, Skylar went on a family vacation, during which she wore a 2-piece swimsuit. Her mom, Kim, thought she looked great. Kim, aware that Skylar and Brandon were getting close, wanted Skylar to start taking birth control pills, believing this would protect her daughter's health and prevent unwanted pregnancies. In mid-April 2017, Skylar visited her mother's gynecologist to get a birth control prescription. Kim waited outside the doctor's office while Skylar met with the doctor. After leaving the examination room, Skylar emerged in tears. Kim immediately asked her daughter why she was so upset, and Skylar replied that it was a traumatic experience. Unbeknownst to Kim, the real reason behind Skylar's tears was that the doctor had informed her that she was approximately 8 months pregnant. Skylar asked the doctor to keep the news secret, as she wasn't ready to share it with her loved ones. 9 days after the incident, Skylar, who was heavily pregnant at the time, attended her prom with her boyfriend Brandon on May 5th. Despite her advanced pregnancy, Skylar was able to fit into her prom gown. 2 months later, on July 14, 2017, the police arrived at the Richardson home. They informed Skylar's parents, Kim and Scott, that they needed to speak with Skylar about something she may have witnessed. The police reassured the parents that Skylar was not in any trouble and took her at their word. Scott decided to drive Skylar to the police station, unsure of what would happen when they got there. The police wanted to ask Skylar some questions about a call they had received from a doctor who specializes in women's health. This doctor's office had reported that one of their patients, a young woman, had given birth to a baby and then buried the baby in her backyard. When they arrived at the police station, the police took Skylar into custody and put her in a room where they would ask her questions. Skylar's father was not allowed to be in the room with her before the interview started. The police then read Skylar her rights and told her about the call they had received from the doctor's office. According to the caller, on April 26th, Skylar had gone to the doctor's office and found out she was pregnant. But when she went back to the office, she told the doctor that the baby was not alive and that she had buried it in her backyard. During her police interview, Skylar confessed to giving birth to a stillborn baby girl on May 7, 2017. She revealed that she had delivered the baby in her bathroom, where she discovered the infant wasn't breathing and had no heartbeat. Skylar felt compelled to bury the baby and opted to keep the incident a secret. Without making a sound, Skylar went downstairs, fetched a small garden shovel, and dug a shallow grave in her backyard. She buried the baby, marking the spot and preserving the memory of her child. Skylar placed a vase with a flower at the burial site. After questioning Skylar, the police informed her parents, Kim and Scott, about the true reason she was brought to the station. Kim and Scott were stunned to learn their daughter had been pregnant, as they were completely unaware. Kim was devastated upon hearing the news, saddened that her daughter had endured this ordeal alone. Skylar told her parents she had named the baby Annabelle and said the father was a cousin of a close friend, someone she had briefly dated. Then, crime scene investigators arrived at the Richardson home to search for the baby's remains. The investigators carefully searched the area, removing weeds and brushing the ground to uncover any hidden evidence. Despite the overgrown vegetation, they thoroughly examined every inch of the area. After clearing the weeds and brushing the ground, the police found several bones, including parts of the skull. They carefully collected these remains, placing them in small body bags to preserve any evidence they might hold. The investigators took great care to handle the bones gently, ensuring they remained intact. One investigator recalled that the remains had a strong odor, while another investigator acknowledged that the bones were extremely small, making it challenging to distinguish them from rocks. The coroner confirmed the discovery of hair and tiny fingernails, but no organs or other recognizable features. After being questioned for over 5 hours, Skylar and her parents were permitted to return home. However, 6 days later, the police contacted Skylar, requesting her presence once again. They reassured her father, Scott, that she was not in trouble. During the subsequent interview with Skylar, the police revealed that they had received new information from the coroner's office that contradicted her initial account. The medical examiner who analyzed the remains claimed to have found evidence suggesting that the baby's bones may have been subjected to fire. Skylar was taken aback when the police told her that her baby had been burned. She strongly denied starting a fire, insisting that she would never harm her child. However, the police were convinced that Skylar was guilty of killing her baby girl and trying to destroy the evidence by burning her remains. They suggested that Skylar might have tried to cremate the baby's body to get rid of it, but this idea only confused Skylar further. She remained adamant that she hadn't burned the baby. But then Skylar changed her story. She told the police that she did have a lighter and might have used it to try to cremate her baby's remains. She also revealed that the baby might have been born alive, as it had made a sound, possibly even cried, on one occasion. Skylar admitted to holding the newborn too tightly, which might have contributed to its death. During a 1-hour interrogation, the police collected enough evidence to arrest Skylar on a charge of reckless homicide. They believed that Skylar had suffocated the baby. After presenting their case to a grand jury, Skylar was eventually indicted and arrested for aggravated murder, a charge that carries a mandatory life sentence in Ohio. At her arraignment, Skylar pleaded not guilty to the additional charges of voluntary manslaughter, abuse of a corpse, and putting children in danger. She spent the weekend in jail until her family could secure a $50,000 bond. Following the tragic death of her child, Skylar found herself at the center of a fierce media storm. From the moment her name was made public, the public judged and scrutinized everything she and her family did. The constant judgment and scrutiny had a severe impact on their well-being, leading them to retreat to the safety of their own home. However, even there, they received threats that made it difficult for them to venture outside, and the public would take pictures of them, further fueling the frenzy and adding to the immense pressure they faced. The public scrutiny became overwhelming, affecting every part of their lives. Although Skylar's defense attorneys thought she had given a false confession and the baby's death was an accident, the prosecution refused to change their approach. Despite new evidence that didn't support their first conclusion, they continued with their case. A key piece of evidence was the medical examiner's initial report, which said the remains were burned. However, after re-examining the evidence, the medical examiner withdrew this statement, saying there was no proof of burning. Even with this new information, the prosecution didn't change their approach. They focused on Skylar's admission that she had tried to cremate the remains, even though the evidence didn't support their theory of a burned body. This showed the state's determination to get a conviction, regardless of the evidence. Skylar's family endured immense stress and fear from public scrutiny and threats, making daily life unbearable. Her defense team worked tirelessly to prepare her case. Though they raised $50,000 for bail, Skylar's release came with an ankle monitor, keeping her mostly homebound and isolated. Over a period of 12 months, Skylar's life underwent a drastic change. She had to put her plans to attend the University of Cincinnati on hold while she waited for her trial, having been accused of murdering her baby. The charges against her were severe, and her defense team filed a motion to have the trial transferred to a different county. However, the request was denied, which meant Skylar had to face the trial in the original jurisdiction. Skylar felt overwhelmed by her situation, struggling to cope with the emotional toll of the allegations and feeling isolated. Her dogs became her main comfort, providing companionship as she awaited trial. Despite the challenges, her family stood by her, believing in her innocence and supporting her fight for freedom. In July 2019, the state made an unexpected offer to Skylar's defense attorney. The offer was that if Skylar pleaded guilty to the remaining charges, which had a 15-year sentence, the state would drop the charge of aggravated murder. Skylar's parents were torn about this decision and wondered if she should take the deal. After thinking it over carefully, Skylar decided to reject the plea deal. This decision scared her parents, who questioned whether she had made the right choice, but they knew it was her decision to make, not theirs. On September 3, 2019, Skylar stood trial for the murder of her newborn daughter. In their opening statements, the prosecution presented a text message Skylar had sent to her mother, in which she expressed happiness and mentioned that her belly had already returned to its normal size, just a few hours after giving birth. The prosecution argued that this message, along with others she sent to her mother and boyfriend within 24 hours of the baby's death, suggested that Skylar was relieved about the baby's death, and pointed to these texts as evidence that she was involved in the baby's death. The prosecution also alleged that Skylar had searched online for how to get rid of a baby, and that her mother, Kim, had warned her that her life would be over if she became pregnant, which had apparently frightened Skylar. According to the prosecutor, Skylar was determined to keep her pregnancy a secret, and when she could no longer conceal her daughter, she took her daughter's life. During the trial, the doctor who performed the autopsy on Skylar's baby testified. She concluded that the baby died from a violent homicide, but couldn't determine if the skull fractures occurred before or after death. Instead, she based her opinion on Skylar's statements during the police interrogation. Skylar's defense attorney questioned the doctor's findings, suggesting she may have been influenced by confirmation bias. The attorney argued that the doctor had already formed an opinion and wasn't likely to change it during cross-examination. The doctor acknowledged that she didn't examine the baby's remains under a dissecting microscope. The attorney asked if she had consulted an obstetrician, and she replied that she hadn't. The attorney also asked if she had looked at photos of the burial site or Skylar's backyard, and again, the doctor said she hadn't. A fetal medicine specialist, another doctor, testified in the afternoon session of Skylar's trial, primarily under questioning by the prosecution. The doctor questioned the claim that Skylar's baby was stillborn, pointing out that there was only one screening and that measurements of fundal height during the third trimester of pregnancy have a 60% margin of error. The doctor also noted that Skylar had reported feeling her baby move, which is not possible for a deceased baby. Furthermore, the doctor expressed skepticism about a report filed by a doctor for the defense, which suggested that Skylar's baby likely had growth issues. During cross-examination by Skylar's attorney, the doctor was asked if he was being paid by the prosecution. He explained that he received $5,000 per day, which is the cost to his practice when a doctor is absent. In the courtroom, the prosecution presented their case against Skylar, revealing shocking and heart-wrenching evidence. The most impactful pieces of evidence were the pictures of the deceased baby's remains displayed on the television screen. Skylar's reactions during the trial, when the pictures of her baby's remains appeared on the screen, showed the lasting impact these images had on her. Initially, Skylar stared straight ahead, avoiding eye contact with the photos, seemingly unable to bear the sight. This stoic demeanor was in contrast to her behavior the previous day, when she visibly trembled as the judge sat down before jury selection. Skylar's defense team presented their case, arguing that her life was far from perfect, even before the murder accusation. They claimed that the prosecution's evidence consisted of half-truths, and that some texts presented in court were taken out of context. The defense team argued that Skylar's frequent use of informal texting language did not necessarily mean she committed the crime of murdering her daughter. They highlighted Skylar's mental health struggles, specifically her long-standing battle with an eating disorder that began when she was 12. The team presented evidence that Skylar regularly saw a psychologist and nutritionist to manage her condition, and showed the jury photos of Skylar at different weights and appearances, including when she was extremely thin and when she appeared slightly heavier. Skylar's defense attorneys highlighted that despite her physical condition, she had cradled the baby for hours while bleeding on the bathroom floor, demonstrating her strong commitment to comforting and caring for the lifeless body after enduring extreme pain. The attorneys told the court that Skylar had planned to inform her family about her pregnancy, but unfortunately, she never got the chance, according to her doctor. Skylar was told she would give birth within 8 to 10 weeks, so she assumed she would have enough time to attend the prom and graduate from high school before discussing the situation with her mother, whom she knew would be unsupportive. During the defense, an obstetrician testified that the baby was stillborn. He argued that since Scott didn't admit to cutting the umbilical cord, it's possible it detached before or during birth. The doctor also pointed out that Skylar's description of the baby's pale appearance was notable, as newborns are usually a purplish color, indicating they're healthy. Additionally, the obstetrician stated that Skylar's weight gain of only 15 pounds throughout her pregnancy was minimal, and suggested that her eating disorder may have restricted the baby's development in the womb. This testimony aimed to raise questions about the accuracy of Skylar's statements to the police regarding the baby's well-being. The defense argued that Skylar had been selective in what she told the police during her interrogation, omitting any harmful behavior towards the baby, and that her testimony lacked credibility. They suggested that other factors might have contributed to the baby's death. After a one-week trial, the jury deliberated for 4 hours before delivering a verdict. Skylar was acquitted of aggravated murder, involuntary manslaughter, and child endangerment. However, she was found guilty of abuse of a corpse, a felony carrying a maximum 1-year prison sentence. The judge ordered her to remain in jail until her sentencing hearing, which took place the following day. At the sentencing hearing, Skylar apologized for her actions and acknowledged the seriousness of her mistakes. The judge was unsympathetic, rebuking Skylar for her role in the tragic loss of her baby. He emphasized that better decisions during her pregnancy would have saved her child's life. The judge's words were stern and unyielding, making it clear that Skylar's choices had devastating consequences. After expressing his dissatisfaction with Skylar's behavior, the judge sentenced her to 3 years of probation for abusing a corpse. This sentence served as a reminder that her actions were both morally wrong and illegal. In November 2020, Skylar's lawyers asked the judge to end her probation 2 years early, and the request was granted. During the hearing, Skylar said she wanted to return to a normal life and didn't need a probation officer to supervise her anymore. The judge acknowledged her progress and agreed that the probation department no longer needed to devote resources to her case. The judge emphasized that probation is not just about punishing or rehabilitating someone, but also giving them a chance to show why they shouldn't be sent to prison. Since being found not guilty, Skylar has made the most of her second chance. She has finished 2 semesters of college and has been working part-time at the law firm that defended her. Although she was cleared of all charges, Skylar has encountered difficulties in finding more employment due to her being on probation. However, she remains resolute in pursuing her career ambitions and has shown an interest in going to law school to become a public defender. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Kelly Clayton. Kelly Clayton, also known as Kelly Stage Clayton, resides in Cotton, New York. Kelly Clayton had a promising life ahead of her. In high school, she was an exemplary student, excelling academically and serving as a role model for her peers. Her academic achievements were impressive, and she passed exams with ease. Despite her academic focus, Kelly's appearance was often described as model-like, and she could have pursued a career in modeling if she had chosen to do so. Following high school, Kelly enrolled in a teacher training university to become a chemistry teacher, which brought immense pride to her parents. However, after a few years, Kelly suddenly lost interest in her studies. It is unclear what triggered this change, but she eventually withdrew from the university and informed her parents that she no longer wanted to pursue a teaching career. Kelly felt that she was too young to be confined to a life of grading notebooks and managing classrooms. Instead, she expressed a desire to travel and experience life to the fullest. Her parents were disappointed and upset by her decision, leading to a 6-month estrangement from their daughter. Kelly's life took an unexpected turn when she met Tom Clayton at a party hosted by mutual friends. Tom was immediately smitten with Kelly and began showering her with attention. His athletic physique and attractive appearance made him a standout, which wasn't surprising given his successful hockey career. As a semi-professional player for the Jackal team, Tom was known for his strength and aggression on the ice. However, he realized his hockey career would eventually end due to physical limitations. Tom would have to retire and enjoy the game from the sidelines, either by attending live matches or watching his favorite team on television. They continued with their lives, starting by returning to New York to get married. They then moved to North Carolina and eventually settled in the small town of Cato, which had only a few thousand residents. Tom started a franchise that specialized in rebuilding houses damaged by fires or disasters. He also worked for a friend's company in a related field. Kelly, on the other hand, had dropped out of university and was working as a waitress. Although she changed jobs, she continued to work even after having 2 children. Tom's income was sufficient for the family, and Kelly could have quit her job to care for their daughters, but she chose to continue working to earn extra money. She used this extra income to buy toys and pamper her children. On September 28, 2015, Tom went to play poker with his friends, the Millers, as he usually did. He preferred to attend these gatherings alone, as playing for money required a certain level of skill and experience. Additionally, someone had to stay home with the children, and bringing the whole family would have turned the evening into a noisy and chaotic affair, detracting from the enjoyment of the game. That evening, Tom was on a losing streak, but instead of giving up, he tried to win back his losses. He suggested that anyone who wanted to stay and play until morning was welcome to do so, but no one took him up on the offer, and he ended up going home. At home, a horrific scene unfolded before Tom's eyes. His wife lay in a pool of her own blood, severely beaten and, at first glance, appeared lifeless. Panicked, Tom frantically searched the rooms for his children. Fortunately, they were unharmed but terrified. He quickly scooped up his daughters and rushed to his neighbor Derek's house, desperate to shield them from the gruesome sight of their mother's battered body. From Derek's house, Tom called the police, struggling to process the chaos. The officer who arrived at the scene found Tom kneeling beside his wife's body, attempting to administer CPR. However, the emergency medical technicians soon intervened and pulled Tom away, revealing the devastating truth: Kelly had been deceased for an extended period, and nothing could be done to revive her. The house was in disarray, with blood covering both floors. The bedroom showed signs of an intense struggle between Kelly and her killer, who carried out the brutal act despite the presence of children in the house. It appeared Kelly had been pushed down the stairs, as evidenced by the broken banister, and brutally beaten with a blunt object until the killer was certain she was dead. No signs of knife or gunshot wounds were found. The officer filming the crime scene observed that Tom seemed lost and in shock. He wandered aimlessly, briefly entering the room before exiting, and was unable to provide the officer with basic information, such as the location of the children's room or the emergency exit. However, when asked about his whereabouts during the murder, Tom calmly stated he had spent the evening at a friend's house playing poker. The officer, failing to obtain clear information from Tom, proceeded to question the neighbor and the children. Tom's eldest daughter, Charlie, described the perpetrator as a robber. According to Charlie, she and her sister were drifting off to sleep when they heard their mother scream loudly from the next room. Their mother yelled, "Charlie, run away from here," and then the whole house shook violently. They cautiously left their room and saw the perpetrator leaning over their mother, beating her with what looked like a hammer. They ran back into the nursery, blocked the door with a small nightstand, and hid under the bed. Fortunately, the perpetrator wasn't looking for them, as the nightstand wouldn't have been enough to stop him. When asked to describe the perpetrator, Charlie said he was big, like a bear. He wore blue jeans, a black shirt, and a mask similar to the one her father wears when hunting. Charlie also noted that the perpetrator's eyes looked like her father's, but she didn't remember anything else, as she only caught a brief glimpse before getting scared and running away. Police officers investigating the house couldn't find evidence to support her claim that the perpetrator was a burglar. There were no signs of forced entry at the front or back doors, but the garage gate was open, which could have been an entry point. However, nothing was stolen from the house, including jewelry and cash, and the cabinets were all closed. This was unusual, as burglars typically search every area. Officers quickly suspected that Tom, was involved in the murder. They believed he was pretending to be a grieving husband and had actually killed his wife to collect insurance payments. If Kelly's life was insured, Tom could potentially receive up to $1 million. The police just needed to gather evidence to solve the case, especially since the daughter mentioned that the perpetrator's mask and eyes resembled her father's. However, the police couldn't find the hunting mask in the house. After discovering Tom's whereabouts on the night in question, the police interviewed the other poker players. One of Tom's friends was incredulous. "You think Tom is the killer? That's unbelievable. His wife was just murdered, and instead of finding the real culprit, you're focusing on him." Another friend, less emotional, chimed in, "Tom couldn't have done it. He worked 2 jobs non-stop because he loved Kelly and their kids. It's just not possible. Besides, he was with us the entire night, playing poker. Even when everyone else was tired, he wanted to keep playing." Laura, an acquaintance of Tom's, shared her concerns during a break in the game. She recalled that Tom had asked to borrow her phone, claiming he had left his in the car, which was only 10 meters away. Laura found this odd but lent him her phone anyway. Tom stepped outside to make the call, but when Laura checked her phone's call history later, there was no record of the call, suggesting that Tom had deleted it. Laura discussed this incident with her husband, who had been sitting next to Tom at the poker table. He noticed that Tom wasn't paying attention to the game, instead keeping his head down, focusing on something on the table. It turned out that Tom had his phone with him the whole time, which raised more questions. Why did Tom borrow Laura's phone if he had his own? Who was he trying to call, and why couldn't he use his own phone? After Laura's testimony, the police re-questioned Charlie, Tom's daughter, and she reiterated that the robber resembled her father. The next testimony came from the niece of Kelly. She explained that she hadn't told her Aunt Kelly about Tom's true nature because she didn't want to upset Kelly. Aunt Kelly adored Tom. The niece felt her truth wasn't needed, implying that it wouldn't change anything. The niece saw Tom as a person with 2 sides. On the surface, he appeared caring and attentive, often showering Aunt Kelly with attention and gifts, and even helping with childcare, which is more than many fathers do. However, his behavior at work revealed a completely different personality. Recognizing her niece's concerns about being young and alone, Aunt Kelly had set up a job for her with Tom the previous summer. During her employment, the niece handled tasks such as correspondence, registration, and managing documents. At first, her interactions with Tom were strictly professional, mainly because she didn't know him well before working for him. One day, Tom got drunk and came to the office, revealing to the niece that his family life was a facade. He confessed to loving his daughters, but not his wife, Aunt Kelly. He had been unfaithful, having multiple affairs during their marriage, and considered leaving her but stayed due to financial concerns. It was later also confirmed by female participants of a poker game that Tom was indeed unfaithful, having relationships with 2 women present at the game. Additionally, Kelly's 16-year-old niece shared information about Michael Beard, another employee of Tom's firm. Michael was doing repair work on houses after a fire, but there were frequent reports of items going missing from the houses where he worked. Tom initially doubted his customers when they accused Michael Beard of theft during fire restoration jobs. However, as the complaints continued, it became clear that Michael was indeed stealing from clients. Additionally, there were allegations of Michael showing up to work intoxicated. When Tom finally confronted Michael about his behavior, he was understandably upset and disappointed. Despite having every right to be angry, Tom took a surprisingly compassionate approach. Instead of simply firing Michael and cutting ties, Tom actively reached out to other companies and recommended Michael for a job. When none of those opportunities panned out, Tom took it a step further and offered Michael work around his own house, doing odd jobs like cutting the grass, watering plants, and making minor repairs. This decision showed that Tom was willing to give Michael a second chance, even if it meant finding alternative employment for his former employee. The detective brought Michael Beard in for questioning. Michael claimed he only stole because he and his family were in dire need of money. He expressed his gratitude towards Tom, his former employer, who had always defended him. Michael also praised Tom's wife, who had shown kindness by feeding him and giving his children old clothes. However, the investigation took a turn when Michael's wife, Holly, was interrogated. She revealed that Tom had offered Michael a job, which Michael had not mentioned earlier, and promised to pay him $10,000 for it. This new information raised suspicions about Michael's alibi. He was called back to the station and hooked up to a lie detector. The test results indicated that Michael was lying, and he eventually cracked under pressure and began to confess. The investigation was sparked by the death of Kelly, which had shaken Michael. He had even attended church to pray for her soul, showing that he was genuinely distraught by her passing. Despite initial doubts about his involvement, the police had released him after the first round of questioning. However, Holly's testimony changed everything. Tom promised Michael $10,000 to kill his wife, Kelly, and make it look like an accident. The plan was for Michael to sneak into the house while Tom was playing poker, strangle Kelly, and then start a fire to cover up the crime. The house was insured for a large sum of money. Michael found 2 cans of gasoline waiting for him in the garage, which he would use to set the fire. He quietly entered the house while everyone was asleep. He crept upstairs to Kelly's bedroom, but she was either awake or woken by the sound of the door. She saw Michael and began screaming. Kelly's screaming startled Michael, and he tried to strangle her. However, Kelly was stronger than she appeared and fought back. A fierce struggle ensued, moving from the bedroom to the kitchen. Michael was surprised by Kelly's strength, which made the fight much more intense than he had anticipated. Michael was in a state of shock and panic, flailing his arms wildly and grabbing at Kelly's clothes, unable to focus on the fight. In contrast, Kelly was fighting for her life, accurately aiming her blows at Michael's face. If the police had arrived at Michael's location sooner, they would have seen evidence of the beating he had taken. After a prolonged struggle, Michael slammed Kelly's head into the wall with great force, knocking her to the ground. She was unable to get up for some time. Michael then produced a hammer and continued to strike Kelly's head until she showed no signs of life. Consumed by rage and panic, Michael fled the house, forgetting that Tom had instructed him not only to kill Kelly but also to set fire to the house to conceal the crime. Mark Blandford, Michael's accomplice, was just the driver. Knowing Michael from working together and staying with him, Mark had not been surprised when Michael, known for petty theft, had asked him to drive during a break-in. Mark had mentioned that he had initially wanted to decline Michael's request, but that the offer of $500 had been tempting. After some deliberation, Michael had convinced him to participate. Michael's plan had been to rob a businessman, and he had needed Mark's assistance to make a quick getaway before the police arrived. Michael had also promised to help with the car. Mark had eventually agreed, but only on the condition that he could park the car at a safe distance from the house. Michael had accepted this condition. That evening, Mark had waited for Michael in the car in a dark alley, and Michael had come back quickly enough, breathing heavily and telling him to move as fast as possible. Michael hadn't had any bag or sack on him, which hadn't looked much like a robbery. Mark hadn't asked him any questions along the way, simply because he hadn't wanted to know anything. He had just wanted his $500, which he hadn't ended up getting. On the way out, Michael had asked Mark to stop at a bridge over a creek a couple blocks south of there. Mark had stopped there, and Michael had hastily stripped off his outer garments and thrown them off the bridge. Mark had offered to show the place if needed. Indeed, police officers who had arrived on the scene at Mark's behest had found parts of Michael's outer clothing near the creek, as well as the hammer used to kill Kelly. Michael, already in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, began to change his testimony. According to him, he was indeed hired by Tom, indeed for $10,000, but only to commit arson at the house and nothing more. Michael spent a very long time assuring the police of his innocence, and all because he did not know that Mark had shown the place where Michael had thrown out his things, and that his clothes, as well as the murder weapon, had already been submitted for examination. And the experts found both on his clothes and on the hammer the blood of Kelly Clayton. And that was the most direct proof that it was him who killed Kelly, not someone else. Tom denied ordering the massacre of his wife, claiming Michael acted alone. According to Tom, Michael knew Tom had money and was motivated by resentment over losing his job. Tom suggested Michael robbed his house, unaware Kelly was home, resulting in her death. However, Laura, a woman who played poker with Tom, revealed that Tom used her cell phone to make a call. The detective obtained the call records, confirming suspicions. The records showed Tom called Michael on the night of September 28th to 29th. Michael was tried first and maintained he was hired to set fire to the house for insurance purposes. He claimed he didn't kill Kelly and the blood on his clothes came from touching her dead body. He had disposed of his belongings to avoid suspicion of being at the Claytons' house that night. His testimony seemed convincing. The jury deliberated for 7 hours before delivering a guilty verdict on all counts against Michael Beard, who now faced life imprisonment. In contrast, Tom's lawyers managed to gather records of conversations and correspondence between Tom and Michael, but none of these clearly mentioned their nefarious plan. Furthermore, the prosecution's attempts to obtain billing transcripts of Tom's movements yielded no concrete evidence. All the evidence against Tom was circumstantial. However, one key detail caught the attention of investigators. The car in which Mark had given Michael a ride was registered to Tom's company. Moreover, on the day of the incident, Tom had arrived at the office in his personal Toyota but then switched to the company's pickup truck, which was later driven to Michael's house and left there. The truck was returned to the office the day after the tragedy. This suggested that Tom had, in fact, provided Michael with the car that he and Mark used to commit the crime. It was a crucial piece of evidence that the jury testified to during the trial. The 6-day trial concluded with the jury finding Tom guilty of hiring Michael to commit the heinous crime. Michael subsequently appealed, using the testimony of young Charlie, who claimed that the eyes behind the mask belonged to her father. However, the court dismissed the appeal due to the matching description of the clothing found under the bridge. Consequently, Tom Clayton and Michael Beard were sentenced to life in prison. Mark received a 4-year prison sentence for manslaughter. The custody of Tom and Kelly's children was awarded to Kelly's sister, Kim. With time, Charlie has learned to cope with the tragedy. Although she occasionally remembers her mother, she refuses to discuss her father, whom she will never want to see again. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Carmen Thomas. Carmen Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987, in South Africa. Her life took a drastic turn when her father passed away when she was just 10 years old. Overwhelmed by grief, her family moved to live with relatives in Whitby, United Kingdom. However, the move did not bring the peace they had hoped for, and they eventually returned to South Africa. When Carmen turned 18, she decided to leave behind with her relatives and later relocated to London to pursue her education. She earned a master's degree in marketing and quickly became known for her charismatic and outgoing personality. Carmen formed strong bonds with many people and became a loyal friend and companion. However, living in a big city like London came with its expenses, and Carmen had to work hard to maintain a decent standard of living. By day, she worked as a marketer in a store, and by night, she worked part-time at a gentleman's club. Although her career choices may have raised eyebrows, Carmen was a woman of principle and never compromised her values. She conducted herself with dignity and earned the respect of her clients. It was during her time at the club that she met Brad Callahan, a charming and flamboyant man. Brad was born in April 1978 in New Zealand to parents who separated when he was just 9 years old. He stayed with his mother and later moved to Australia. Brad graduated from university in 2001 with a degree in construction engineering. He was then offered a job as a chief structural engineer for a large business complex in the UK by a prominent construction company. To navigate the complex's high-stakes negotiations and enhance his professional status, Brad sought the services of a gentleman's agency, where he met Carmen. She was intelligent, tall, and beautiful, with striking dark eyes and black hair. However, Brad's demanding career and ambitious nature left him little time for a serious relationship. Despite this, Brad and Carmen got along well after a dinner, and their casual interactions eventually blossomed into a solid friendship. Over time, their friendship deepened into a romance, and they began living together. Their relationship was built on mutual trust, care, and support. When Carmen got pregnant, Brad decided it would be better to go back to New Zealand, a country with cleaner air and a more laid-back lifestyle. In March 2005, they returned to Auckland. After the birth of their son Jack, they experienced immense happiness. They prioritized Jack's safety and well-being, making sure he had everything he needed for a happy childhood. However, the arrival of their son brought significant challenges to their relationship. The first problems arose in the relationship between Carmen and Brad due to disagreements on how to raise their child, causing tension and instability. After 3 years, they decided to go their separate ways, but shared joint custody of their son, Jack. The breakup was challenging for both, but they made a genuine effort to maintain a positive relationship for Jack's sake. Carmen and Jack eventually moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, who also lived in Oakland. With time, Carmen regained her emotional balance and started a new life without Brad. In 2008, she and her son relocated to a house on a street near Brad's, so Jack could be close to his father. Having lost her own father at a young age, Carmen wanted to ensure Jack always had a father figure in his life. Despite her decision to live near Brad, Carmen's friends and family believed she and Brad still had a good friendship, but in reality, they only spent time together when it was related to Jack. As time passed, life continued for Carmen. After parting ways, Carmen and Brad each attempted to move on. Brad resumed his career as a construction engineer and, in May 2009, began a new relationship, which ultimately led to an engagement. Meanwhile, Carmen devoted herself to raising their son and, much to Brad's dismay, returned to her work at a gentleman's club. This choice troubled Brad. Carmen repeatedly presented Brad with ultimatums, but he dismissed her requests, focusing on his impending marriage and plans for fatherhood once again. This marked the beginning of adjustments to his financial commitments, specifically affecting the alimony payments for the maintenance of their son, Jack, which Brad made in accordance with their agreement. However, Carmen viewed the financial constraints as a catalyst in an escalating series of conflicts. Tensions escalated until March 19, 2010, when a domestic violence incident occurred. Police responded to a neighbor's call about a dispute and mediated the situation. As a result, Carmen received a formal warning from law enforcement. On June 29, 2010, Brad visited Carmen's house to discuss a new school for Jack and to sign a written agreement for child support. However, Carmen was unhappy with the document and asked Brad to leave, yelling that Jack was not his son as he departed. 2 weeks later, Brad tried to contact Carmen again, but she did not respond. On July 13, 2010, Brad reported Carmen missing to the police, who began searching for her. Through video footage and interviews with neighbors, investigators were able to reconstruct a timeline of events leading up to Carmen's disappearance. They discovered that on June 29, a surveillance camera at a nearby supermarket had captured footage of Carmen, providing a potential lead in the search. During their investigation of the rented house where Carmen and Jack lived, police noticed that there was no outdoor garbage can. Inside the house, they found bloodstains on the front door, washing machine, sink, and shower. To confirm the presence of blood, forensic scientists used luminol, a substance that reacts with the iron in hemoglobin. The test revealed multiple patterns of blood on the bathroom door and floor. The landlord reported that on June 29, she heard loud screaming, followed by prolonged crying and moaning. When she knocked on Carmen's door, no one answered. She looked out the window and saw a street trash can and an overturned drying rack, which caught her attention. She called her husband, but before he arrived, Brad walked out of the house, carrying soiled clothes. He told the landlord that Carmen had become ill after a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, the landlord noticed that Brad appeared to have just taken a shower. She had no reason to doubt his story, so she didn't call the police. The search for Carmen continued, and her cell phone activity caught the police's attention. Although messages were being sent from her phone regularly, the tone and language used were unusual and didn't match her previous communication style. The outgoing messages and calls continued until July 10th. During further investigation, Carmen's car was found, and in the back seat, they discovered her luggage, clothes, and other personal belongings. The police investigation into Carmen's disappearance began with the examination of her seized suitcase, which revealed traces of blood and a note indicating she owed money to her employer. An envelope with Misty's name and $270 was also found in the glove compartment. Inspector Mark Benefield suspected foul play after finding blood in the car and launched a search for Carmen's body in the countryside southeast of Auckland, but it was inconclusive. As the investigation continued, police analyzed Carmen's and Brad's phones, discovering they had been in close proximity to each other during the search. However, Carmen's phone was not connected to a cell tower in Hamilton. A crucial piece of evidence was a missing trash can, which had disappeared from its usual spot near the house on the day Carmen vanished. A neighbor reported seeing the can being taken away through her window. Police suspected the trash can might have been used to dispose of evidence. When EE examined Brad's phone records and bank card details, then they found that on June 30th, Brad had purchased a meat cleaver, a large plastic container, and several garbage bags, which raised suspicions. By studying Brad's daily routine, police identified some unusual events, including a day when he arrived early at the construction site and walked alone around the property for an extended period. While it was not unusual for a supervisor to be on site early, the police found it noteworthy. After gathering evidence, including Carmen's cell phone and suspicious purchases, they began to suspect Brad of murder. They believed Brad had killed his former lover, Carmen Thomas, by hitting her multiple times in the head and then carefully hiding her body. On September 21st, Brad was arrested and charged with Carmen's murder and attempting to obstruct justice. Brad's second son was born while he was in custody, causing him to become emotional and resentful. 9 days after his arrest, Brad broke down and revealed to investigators the location of Carmen's body. It turned out that Brad had attempted to create an alibi by making it seem like Carmen had left for Hamilton and never returned. However, under questioning, he eventually detailed the events of the day Carmen was killed, revealing that his plan had not been as perfect as he thought. Brad admitted that Carmen and Brad had a heated argument, which ended with Carmen telling Brad that Jack was not his son. In a fit of rage, Carmen kicked Brad out of the house. However, he returned 5 minutes later, grabbed a baseball bat, and brutally attacked Carmen, striking her in the head with such force that she fell unconscious, bleeding profusely. Despite realizing the gravity of his actions, Brad continued to assault Carmen, throwing several punches. Memories of happier times flashed before his eyes, but his anger and resentment consumed him. Brad knew his life would never be the same after this moment, and he could never undo the damage. Nevertheless, he felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, believing that he had solved his problem and ensured that Jack was now his alone. Brad regained his composure, took a shower, and quietly left Carmen's house. In the following days, he devised a plan to dispose of Carmen's body and cover up the crime. He met his friend outside a supermarket and asked him to buy black garbage bags, kerosene, and cleaning products, hoping to avoid raising suspicion. Brad then returned to the apartment, meticulously cleaned up the bloodstains, wrapped Carmen's body in a bag, and disposed of it in a trash can. After killing Carmen, Brad dismembered her body into 8 pieces to make it easier to dispose of. He cut off her legs at the hip joints and then cut each leg in half at the knee. He also severed her arms and head from her torso. A few days later, on July 3rd, Brad met a friend at a boat ramp in Oahu Bay, near downtown Oakland. He confessed to his friend that he had killed Carmen during an argument and asked for help disposing of her body. However, his friend refused to provide a boat to dump the remains into the sea. Over the next few days, Brad drove to Ware Ridge in West Auckland and buried the dismembered body parts in a shallow grave. On July 7th, he drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot. He left a suitcase of clothes and some of her personal belongings in the car to make it seem like she had left voluntarily. However, he made a critical mistake by including bloody clothes in the suitcase. In an attempt to cover his tracks, Brad started sending text messages from Carmen's cell phone to her friends, pretending to be her. He claimed that she was not feeling well and had been in bad shape for days. However, this plan ultimately backfired on him. On October 1st, police excavated the burial site indicated by Brad and found the body of Carmen Thomas. Her remains were discovered in plastic containers, carefully removed from a makeshift grave on Wayfair Ridge. An autopsy revealed that Carmen Thomas had died from multiple blows to the head, with the fatal blow causing a compressed skull fracture. After multiple forensic examinations, Carmen's body was released to her family on October 13th. Tragically, her young son Jack, who had been waiting and hoping to see his mother again, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket. On February 8, 2011, Brad Callahan's first court hearing was held. Judge Winning determined that the crime was unintentional and took into account Brad's claim that he acted impulsively in a state of rage. However, the judge was more severe in his assessment of the subsequent cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callahan was charged with attempting to change the course of justice. A retrial was held on November 25, 2011, where police officers filled the High Court in Auckland. In a surprise move, Brad Callahan made 2 guilty pleas, admitting to murder and attempting to change the course of justice after Carmen's death. A judge has sentenced 31-year-old Brad Callahan to life in prison for murdering Carmen Thomas. Brad was also given a 6-year sentence for attempting to interfere with the investigation into Thomas's death. The judge considered this one of the most serious cases of attempted interference with justice, describing Brad's actions as extremely serious. During the trial at Auckland High Court, the judge criticized the brutality of Thomas's murder, but decided not to impose the harshest possible sentence. The courtroom was filled with Thomas's friends and family, including her parents who had traveled from South Africa. Judge Venin condemned Brad's attempts to cover up his crime, which involved considerable effort and deception. The 6-year sentence for interfering with the investigation will be served at the same time as the life sentence. In a statement, the Thomas family expressed their ongoing anger and grief, saying that no punishment can bring their daughter back. However, They are relieved that Brad will be in prison for a long time, giving him the opportunity to reflect on the harm he has caused. Little boy Jack Brad is living with his grandmother in another town under an assumed name. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Brandon Duran. Brandon Duran was born in 1980 in San Diego, California. Brandon's father was an avid motorcyclist and a former member of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club, which the FBI considers a criminal organization, the second largest in the world after the Hells Angels. His parents divorced when he was around 10 years old. However, they maintained a good relationship and were equally involved in their son's upbringing. His father's love of motorcycles gradually passed on to Brandon. At the age of 25, he had his own motorcycle which he had assembled by hand and treasured dearly. He often spent time with other bikers, but did not belong to any motorcycle club. The unexpected death of Brandon's father in April 2005 was a very challenging experience for him. Trying to overcome the growing depression, Brandon decided to make a change in his life. He got on a motorcycle and drove to Las Vegas. After living in Vegas for about a year, Brandon met 24-year-old Amber Andrews, whose company helped him forget his problems. Their romance happened quickly, and they got married just 2 months after meeting. By this time, Amber was already pregnant. In December 2006, she gave birth to Brandon's son, Brando. The birth of a child was a crucial change in Brandon's life. He became a caring father and husband who worked at a high-paying job and prioritized his family over his personal interests. However, the same could not be said about Amber. Seemingly indifferent to the birth of their child, she remained devoted to her lifestyle, frequently attending biker gatherings and various parties. As a result, their family's relationship began deteriorating rapidly, sometimes leading to conflicts. Inevitably, this situation culminated in a divorce, filed 4 years after their wedding. Brandon was granted full custody of the child, as he was better able to provide for both himself and his son. After the divorce was finalized in 2010, Amber returned to her hometown of Meeker in Oklahoma, while Brandon went back to San Diego with his son. He was happy to be reunited with his family, who later assisted him in raising the child. Over time, the emotional scars from the failed marriage began to heal, and Brandon regained his optimism about the future. However, while contemplating the future, the past came knocking at his door. In the summer of 2012, he saw his ex-wife Amber on his doorstep. She wanted to reconcile and asked him to give their relationship another chance. The feelings that Brandon had diligently suppressed resurfaced. He believed in the sincerity of his ex-wife and agreed to a fresh start. In September, their son Brando was supposed to start kindergarten, and Amber asked the three of them to go to Oklahoma to visit her parents, who wanted to see their grandson. Brandon agreed, and they started preparing for the trip, planning to stay in Oklahoma for about a week. A few days before Brandon, Amber, and their son returned to San Diego, Van Emblem contacted the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. Van reported that his friend and employer, 30-year-old Justin Hammer from Garvin County, had asked for help to dispose of a body, claiming it was the body of Brandon Duran. After receiving the call from the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation about a possible crime, the local sheriff and his assistant immediately went to the ranch owned by Hammer. Authorities also contacted Brandon's relatives from San Diego, but they found that Brandon was unreachable for several days until they confirmed the information provided by Van. They decided not to disclose the details of this case to Brandon's family. During questioning, Justin Hammer quickly confessed to murdering Brandon Duran. However, Hammer claimed he acted in self-defense, describing Duran as a dangerous motorcycle gang member who had threatened him. Hammer alleged that on August 7th, Brandon had driven up to his house on a motorcycle, kicked open the door, gone inside, and started threatening him. Hammer stated that he had a close personal connection with Amber, which prompted Brandon to pay him an unexpected visit. According to Hammer, Brandon threatened him, ordering him to stay away from Amber and warning that he would ask his biker friends to harm him severely, even suggesting that his family members would be targeted if he didn't comply. Supposedly, Hammer then picked up a shotgun from the corner of the room and fired it, only to discover that he had killed Brandon. Afraid of retaliation from the Banditos motorcycle club, Hammer chose not to contact the police and instead opted to cover up all evidence of the incident. Justin relocated the body to the bathroom, where he dismembered it using a saw and then placed the parts into 5-gallon buckets. He filled the buckets with cement to encase the remains. According to his statement, the buckets were too heavy for him to load into his pickup truck by himself, so he enlisted the help of his friend Van. After disposing of the body, Hammer thoroughly cleaned the house to remove any evidence. He then burned the cleaning supplies, gloves, and rags he had used. Additionally, he claimed to have given Brandon's motorcycle to a relative, who took it apart for spare parts. The officers went to Meeker to break the devastating news to Amber. After learning about the death of her child's father, the woman was left in shock. Despite being divorced, she and Brandon had planned to reconcile and start living together again. Amber revealed that she had gotten into a fight with Brandon the previous day, triggered by his discovery of her romantic relationship with Justin Hammer. Following their argument, Brandon stormed off on his motorcycle, vowing to confront her lover himself. The investigation revealed new evidence that raised significant doubts about the credibility of Hammer's testimony. Criminologists conducting a search of Hammer's home discovered that the door had been kicked in from the inside, and the shoe print on the door matched the sneakers worn by Hammer, strongly indicating that he was responsible for knocking down the door. Furthermore, they uncovered a list of items necessary for disposing of a body and a gun safe, suggesting that the crime was premeditated rather than spontaneous, and that Hammer had been preparing for it in advance. Apart from the 5 buckets, they additionally extracted a cement-filled doghouse from the pond that held extra fragments which did not fit into the buckets. This key evidence led to Justin Hammer being formally charged with first-degree murder. The forensic medical expert faced a challenging task in analyzing the 25 separate body fragments of Duran. The autopsy revealed that Brandon had been shot 4 times in the head, with 3 pistol shots and 1 shotgun blast. According to the expert, the shotgun gun blast was the final shot, and by then, Brandon was likely deceased and lying on the floor. This contradicted Hammer's statement, which claimed he had fired only once with a shotgun. However, this didn't add up to the investigators. They wondered why Hammer would use a shotgun after firing 3 pistol shots, especially since Brandon was already dead. This evidence hinted that someone other than Hammer might have been involved in the crime. The investigators' call to Brandon's mother, Cindy, left her stunned when they told her about her son's death. Once she recovered from the shock, Cindy explained that Brandon had never been a member of the Banditos motorcycle club. She said that Brandon's father had passed on his love for motorcycles to his son, but it never went beyond that. Cindy also mentioned another interesting detail. When Brandon left for Oklahoma, his bike was broken, and he had loaded it into the back of his pickup truck, hoping to fix it there. Cindy also said that Brandon avoided conflict and that his ex-wife, Amber, was the source of all his problems. Amber's infidelity had plagued their relationship from the start. Even after the birth of their son, Amber continued her lifestyle, and whenever Brandon expressed his disapproval of her behavior, she would start a fight. All this eventually led to a divorce, with Brandon getting full custody of their son, which made Amber furious. She then disappeared for over a year, showing no interest in her son's life. So, when she suddenly appeared and asked for a second chance, Brandon and his family were shocked. After learning about Justin Hammer and Amber's romantic relationship, the investigators turned their attention to Brandon's ex-wife. Amber told the police that Brandon had left on a motorcycle following their argument. However, his family contradicted this, saying the motorcycle was broken. This raised a question. If the breakage was not severe, why would Brandon take the motorcycle all the way to Oklahoma instead of fixing it at home? Amber had never mentioned that Brandon was repairing it. Amber also claimed she had a doctor's appointment on the day Brandon went to deal with Hammer, but the police found no evidence of her visit to any medical facility in the city. This meant Amber had no solid alibi for the time in question. Further investigation revealed that Amber had asked a friend to babysit her son on the day of Brandon's death. When the friend arrived at 3 p.m., Amber and Brandon left the house together in Brandon's pickup truck with a motorcycle in the back. Amber had left her phone at home and didn't return for 8 hours. When she finally did, Brandon and his motorcycle were no longer in the truck. After accessing Amber's phone, investigators discovered a message she had received shortly before she and Brandon left the house. The text, sent by Justin Hammer, read, "The ink is ready." Investigators suspected that this was a coded message, indicating that everything was in place to deal with Brandon. Following interviews with Amber's close friends, detectives learned that she had no intention of reconciling with her ex-husband and consistently spoke ill of him. She harbored a strong resentment towards Brandon, who had been granted full custody of their son, and viewed him as uncool, referring to him as a square. Soon, the authorities discovered physical evidence that contradicted Amber's story. Handwriting analysis revealed that Amber had written the note found in Hammer's safe, which detailed the items needed to dispose of a body. Upon reviewing the local hardware store's CCTV footage, police found evidence that the crime had been carefully planned in advance. The footage showed Hammer buying buckets and other items from a list Amber had written the day before Brandon's murder. However, while awaiting trial, Hammer insisted that he did not have an accomplice and acted in self-defense. He claimed that the items on Amber's list were needed to repair the house, not to dispose of a body. Furthermore, Hammer explained that he used 2 types of weapons, stating that he held a shotgun in one hand and a pistol in the other. This statement was considered unusual by the investigators. The jury has recommended a life sentence without parole for Hammer, deliberating for only about an hour and a half, despite expectations of a trial that would last several weeks. Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Austin expressed satisfaction with the verdict, deeming it appropriate and a means of providing justice for Brandon Duran's family. Brandon's mother, Cindy Ware, was also pleased with the jury's decision, acknowledging that it was a difficult choice, but one she had been hoping for over the past 2 years. In October 2014, Justin Hammer was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 2 months later, Amber was arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of her ex-husband, desecrating his remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Amber pleaded not guilty, hoping to be released on bail. However, the district judge denied the request, stating that the nature of the allegations warranted the denial of bond. In the spring of 2017, the trial got underway. Prosecutors Christy Miller and Jennifer Austin made the case that Amber was the mastermind behind the crime. They alleged that she had lured Brandon to her lover's house, where Hammer shot him 3 times with a pistol. Amber then fired the final shot from a shotgun, according to the prosecutors. Throughout the trial, the prosecutors emphasized that all witness statements and evidence pointed to Amber's direct involvement in the crime. They argued that she was the only person with a motive to want Brandon out of the way. The defense attorney, Jay Mendros, argued that the prosecutor's office failed to provide any evidence linking Amber to the case, dismissing the allegations as a conspiracy theory. According to Mendros, Amber was not a cold-blooded killer, and Justin Hammer committed the murder because he was afraid of losing her to Brandon Duran. Mendros described the situation as a perfect recipe for disaster, with Duran returning to Oklahoma to rekindle his relationship with Amber Andrews, while Hammer, who had dated Andrews for a year, felt threatened by Duran's presence. Mendros emphasized that Justin Hammer had a clear motive to kill Duran, citing the love triangle between Hammer, Andrews, and Duran. He stressed that the situation was complex, with Andrews having relationships with both men and frequently going back and forth between them. The prosecution, Mendros claimed, had twisted and distorted the evidence to make it appear sinister. He alleged that the prosecution was attempting to convict Amber based on suspicion and innuendo, rather than concrete evidence. Mendros pointed out that Justin Hammer had confessed to the murder, stating that he acted alone. This, Mendros argued, was the only concrete evidence in the case, and it did not implicate Amber as a conspirator or murderer. Jurors delivered a guilty verdict after more than 4 hours of closing arguments in a Garvin County District courtroom, recommending 35-year-old Amber Andrews be sentenced to life in prison. Sentencing was set for June 12, 2017. At the hearing, Amber appeared in a good mood. Brandon's mother, Cindy Ware, emotionally took the witness stand to express the impact of her son's death on her and her grandson. Before the judge's verdict, defense attorney Jay Mendros made another statement, saying, "It's still the defense's position that there's nothing that ties her to this murder." Mendros told the judge there's no evidence that she was involved in this murder. He would ask the judge to disregard the jury's verdict and reset the case, arguing that the state's case was void of evidence and played on jurors' emotions to get the guilty verdict. Amber Andrews was given a life sentence without parole for the murder of Brandon Duran in the first degree. She also received 7 years for desecrating his remains and another 10 years for conspiring to commit a felony. Her accomplice, Justin Hammer, is currently serving his sentence at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma, while Andrews is incarcerated at the Mabel Bassett Correctional Center in McLeod, Oklahoma. As for Brandon's son, Brando, he has been in the custody of the Oklahoma Department of Human Services since August 7, 2012, and has been living with a foster family. After a long battle with the court system, Cindy, Brando's grandmother, was finally able to bring him back to San Diego in January 2013 to live with her. However, it took her 5 more years to gain full custody of Brando. After the trial, Cindy and her relatives told Brando the truth about the verdict and his mother, Amber Andrews. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Elizabeth Arellano. In the spring of 2016, in the peaceful town of Fort Worth, there was a brutal and cynical murder that even surprised the most experienced investigators. The victim of the crime was a young mother of many children named Elizabeth Poulet Arellano, who worked as a paramedic. It is shocking to discover who her executioner was. The circumstances surrounding the tragic incident were quite puzzling, leading the police to initially consider the possibility that Elizabeth may have passed away of her own volition. However, this theory was contradicted by the accounts provided by accidental witnesses who observed the horrific scene. The investigation required extensive efforts to thoroughly understand the events and bring the perpetrator to justice. Despite the brutality of the crime committed, many felt that the sentence imposed was overly lenient and unjust. Elizabeth Poulet Arellano was born on August 16, 1987, in the American city of Fort Worth, Texas, where she was destined to live all her short life. She grew up with her 2 sisters, Alessandra and Giovanna, with whom she was always practically inseparable. Elizabeth's birth father left the family when she was very young and showed no interest in the fate of his daughter, not contacting her in any way. Soon, her mother Juanita remarried a man named Fidel, who adopted her children and treated them as his own. Elizabeth had a very warm relationship with her stepfather, who supported and helped her in everything. She studied diligently at school and dreamed of one day becoming a doctor. In high school, she met a man named Rudolph Arellano, with whom she soon entered a romantic relationship. The young man was almost 8 years older than her, which somewhat embarrassed Elizabeth's parents. But they did not interfere with their romance, because the chosen partner seemed to them a serious and quite reliable man. At the age of 16, shortly after finishing school, Elizabeth married her partner. Legally, the couple had 4 children, one after the other, 3 sons and a daughter. However, despite the presence of multiple heirs, Elizabeth did not intend to become a homemaker. She recalled her childhood aspiration, so Elizabeth completed medical school and secured employment as a paramedic, with the intention of pursuing further education to become a physician. The young woman was kind and devout, raised in the Christian faith. She took her children to church regularly, instilling in them a love and compassion for their fellow human beings. Family and friends described her as a very caring person, always willing to lend a helping hand. From the outside, their marriage with Rudolph appeared strong and happy, but after 13 years of living together, this union began to show signs of strain. Rudolph had been jealous of his young wife earlier, trying to control every aspect of her life, but over time, his behavior became simply intolerable. In the spring of 2016, Elizabeth, after another jealousy scene organized by her husband, took the children and moved to her parents' house. Rudolph made an attempt to reconcile with his wife, but the young woman was tired of tolerating his outbursts of anger. Additionally, she did not want the children to listen to their parents' arguments almost every day, so she gathered her courage and officially filed for divorce. A few days after Elizabeth took the children and filed for divorce, she mysteriously disappeared. According to friends and family, she was in good spirits and, in order to distract herself from family problems and the impending divorce, decided after work to go with colleagues to a local club. So on the evening of April 15, 2016, the 28-year-old woman, accompanied by her friends, went to a fun place. There she danced and enjoyed herself, but did not consume any alcohol because she intended to drive home in her own car, which she had used to arrive at the club. Elizabeth returned home well past midnight on April 16th. After parking the car, she called her friend with whom she had spent the evening at the club and told her that she had already reached home and was doing fine. Elizabeth then hung up the phone but never went inside the house. The next morning, Juanita, her mother, was very worried when she found that her daughter was not home. She knew that Elizabeth had planned to spend the evening with friends, but her daughter should have returned a long time ago. Elizabeth could not have left somewhere without informing anyone, and besides, her car was parked outside the house, which meant that she had returned from the club. When Juanita approached the car, she found that it was not locked. The key remained in the ignition, and her daughter's purse and phone lay on the vacant seat. Naturally, she could not leave her personal effects unattended in the unlocked vehicle, implying something dreadful had transpired. She promptly contacted the authorities, reporting a missing person. The police were confident they could swiftly resolve the matter, as they say, while fresh. Furthermore, there was still hope Elizabeth was alive, as the car showed no signs of blood or struggle. Yet, the situation was far from straightforward. The investigation started by meticulously reconstructing the timeline of events on the evening and night in question, tracing Elizabeth's entire route to find and question all potential witnesses, beginning with the friends and colleagues she had spent time with before her disappearance. They provided the exact time when she returned home, and later, Elizabeth herself had called to confirm her safe arrival. Additionally, several calls and messages from her ex-husband, Rudolph Arellano, who had repeatedly attempted to reach her that night, were found on the missing person's phone, but Elizabeth had not responded to any of them. Police officers went to Rudolph's house to find out where he was and what he was doing the previous evening and night. According to him, he had been in contact with his ex-spouse just the night before, and she had promised that she would bring the children to him for the weekend. But afterward, she stopped answering the phone, and he thought she had changed her mind. As for an alibi, Arellano's alibi was questionable. According to him, he sat with a friend at a local bar that evening, and around midnight, he returned to his home and went to bed. His friend and several other people who had been relaxing at the same establishment on Friday confirmed that Rudolph was indeed there, but where he went afterward, no one could say for sure. He assured that he had gone home, but as he now lived alone, there was no one to confirm this. Thus, the police were not going to exclude Mr. Arellano from the list of suspects. Besides, he didn't seem upset or worried. It was clear that he and Elizabeth were in the process of divorce, but they had been married for many years, and she was the mother of his children, and it was strange that her disappearance had not affected him in any way. On the night of the disappearance of Elizabeth, a fisherman called the emergency services to report a strange incident he had witnessed. He said that he was sitting alone with a fishing rod on a bridge, which is part of an interstate highway, when about 4 o'clock in the morning, he noticed a car drive onto the bridge, stop, and then the driver pulled out something large that looked like a person and threw it into the water. It also appeared to him that something bulky and obviously heavy was tied to this person. Since the fisherman was at a great distance and it was still dark, he could not see details, nor could he see the make and number of the car. In addition, there was a strong wind on the bridge, so he could not hear anything. Soon, another witness was found, walking at night with his dog down by the bridge. He did not see what was happening on the bridge itself, but a heartbreaking scream caught his attention. Then he saw something large flying down from the bridge, followed by a splash, and then silence. Based on the testimony of witnesses, the police decided to examine the bottom of the pond near the bridge. A few hours later, divers came across a body with a massive piece of concrete tied to its neck with a rope. The drowned woman turned out to be the missing Elizabeth Arellano. Had it not been for the testimony of a passerby and a fisherman, her body would probably have been discovered very soon or not found at all, because the tide weight did not allow the body to float. Then, a theory was put forward that the young woman decided to leave her life voluntarily, against the background of problems in the family. But this assumption was untenable, because it did not fit with the testimony of a witness who saw how someone threw her into the water, nor with the words of relatives who assured that Elizabeth made great plans for life and would never do this to her children and parents. Elizabeth was still alive when a piece of concrete was tied to her neck and thrown off the bridge. This was evidenced by the forensic medical results, which showed that the young woman had suffocated, and by the testimony of a man who heard her desperate scream as she flew down the bridge. However, the question remained as to who, and for what reason, could have so brutally murdered a mother of many children. Robbery was not considered because none of Elizabeth's belongings were taken. There were suggestions that the killer could have spotted Elizabeth in the club and then followed her home, or someone could have been guarding her at home, waiting for her to return. The ex-husband of Elizabeth, Rudolph, continued to insist that he was sleeping at his home on the night of the murder and had nothing to do with the crime. However, the investigators were still in no hurry to exclude Rudolph from the list of suspects because he had no alibi, and his behavior raised more and more questions. At the funeral, Rudolph displayed an emotional performance, weeping at the coffin of his ex-wife and expressing a desire to be in her place or die alongside her. According to his sister, Elizabeth, he even believed the sincerity of his own words. Additionally, Rudolph actively assisted in the establishment of a charitable foundation to raise funds for the farewell ceremony for his wife. However, after the funeral, when he was once again called to testify, he already looked and behaved completely different, as if nothing bad had happened in his life. The investigation determined that a car of the same make and color as Rudolph's had driven away from Elizabeth's parents' house around 3 a.m. The neighbor also recalled seeing the car parked on the road near Elizabeth's house, and it was established that the car had subsequently driven towards the very bridge from which she had been thrown. When the investigation requested Rudolph's cell phone data for the night of the crime, the questions became even more complex. It turned out that he made several calls that night, first near Elizabeth's workplace, and then near the home of his mother-in-law and father-in-law. He also sent his ex-wife several messages, trying to find out when she would return, but his messages went unanswered. The police finally had enough evidence to arrest Rudolph as the prime suspect and bring him to the station for further questioning. One of the key witnesses in the case was Elizabeth and Rudolph's eldest son, who stated that he had seen the rope removed from his mother's neck earlier in the backyard of his father's house and recognized a piece of concrete that had been lying in their garden shortly before. The investigation found that Rudolph waited for his ex-wife at her parents' home and abducted her before she could enter the house. He forced her into his car, in the trunk of which he had already prepared rope and concrete, and then drove to the bridge for the massacre, expecting to go unnoticed. Despite a large amount of evidence and witness testimony proving his guilt, Rudolph denied any involvement in the crime and continued to insist that he was at home that night. Given the brutality of his actions, Rudolph was facing the ultimate penalty of death, and then, on the advice of his lawyer, he decided to confess to everything and cooperate with the investigation to mitigate the sentence. In January 2019, Arellano pleaded guilty in court and detailed how he kidnapped and murdered his ex-wife and the mother of their 4 children. Juanita, who was in the courtroom listening to his story, fainted, and Alessandra and Giovanna called their sister's killer a monster. Rudolph himself, though he admitted his guilt, felt no remorse or pangs of conscience. He spoke differently and coldly about his murder, did not apologize, and did not explain the motive for his terrible act. The court sentenced the murderer to life in prison without parole. Elizabeth's family members, although they considered such a sentence rather mild, noted that they forgive Rudolph because they do not want their hearts to boil with hatred. Her parents and sisters are now responsible for the upbringing of Elizabeth woman's children. Even though Elizabeth is no longer here, everyone in her family and community will always remember her. She was a lovely, lovely mother. I want to say a lovely daughter too. She was basically my daughter. She had the ultimate respect for me, as I did for her, said her stepfather Fidel Galvan in 2016. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. As the police started their search, they encountered a series of unexpected twists that no one could have predicted. Eventually, the detectives managed to uncover the truth about the girl's fate, but no one was ready for it. Rowan Ford was born on April 11, 1998, in San Diego, California. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother, Colleen, moved with her to a small town called Stella in Missouri. Later, her mom met a man named David, and they got married. Colleen had several children from a previous marriage, and soon after their wedding, she and David had a daughter together. Altogether, Rowan had 2 sisters and 2 brothers, and they shared a very close bond. She spent a lot of time outdoors, riding her bike around town, enjoying swimming, and indulging in her passion for drawing. She also liked going to Sunday school at the local church, where she always volunteered to help other kids who had some issues with their tasks. In November 2007, when Rowan was 9 years old and in the 4th grade at the local elementary school, her mom worked the night shift at a store, while her stepdad spent most of the day on the farm. This left Rowan often fending for herself, which made her very independent. On November 2nd, she stayed home alone as usual. Her mom went to work, and her stepdad hadn't returned from the farm yet. The next morning around 9 a.m., Colleen came home from her night shift and checked Rowan's room, but her daughter wasn't there. She asked her husband where her daughter was. He said she had asked him if she could have a sleepover at a friend's house, and he had let her go. He didn't even ask the friend's name because their town was very small, and he wasn't worried about anything happening to her. But Colleen started to worry and decided to check with all of Rowan's friends. Since there were only a few streets in their town, it didn't take long, but none of them had seen her, and she hadn't stayed over at any of their houses, which made her mother even more concerned. Colleen searched the whole town but couldn't find her daughter. She went back home and told her husband that Rowan was nowhere to be found. She asked him to call the police and report her missing, but he reassured her that everything was fine and that she would come home soon. After waiting for several more hours with no sign of Rowan, Colleen took matters into her own hands and dialed 911 herself. The local sheriff immediately organized a search operation. He went to their house to speak with David, as he was the last person to see Rowan before she disappeared. David said that on that evening, while he was working on the farm with his colleague Christopher, their mutual friend Nathan came by. They all decided to go to David's place to have some drinks and play pool. They stopped by the store, bought some alcohol, and went to David's house, where they spent several hours. Later in the night, Christopher asked Nathan to drive him home to the neighboring town where his trailer was, and they persuaded David to join them to continue the fun. Before leaving the house, he checked on Rowan in her room, seeing that she was asleep. David left with his friends, stopped by the store again, grabbed more alcohol, and headed to Christopher's trailer, where they continued drinking for about an hour. After that, David decided to head home and asked Nathan to give him a ride. Nathan agreed, but chose to take back roads instead of the main highway. By that time, he was quite drunk and didn't want to risk encountering the police. Nathan dropped him off and drove home, while David went straight to bed. Soon after, he was awakened by Rowan, who asked if she could sleep over at a friend's house. Without much thought, he agreed and fell back asleep. Police approached this story with some skepticism. What puzzled them most was the fact that a 9-year-old girl decided to go to her friend's house in the middle of the night, and her stepfather let her go without even asking which friend she was talking about. The sheriff considered that David might be hiding something or directly involved in Rowan's disappearance, but he had no evidence to support this theory. Police searched the town and its surroundings until late at night. Local residents immediately joined the search, as they all knew Rowan's family and wanted to help. The population of Stella was only about 150 people, so news of her disappearance spread throughout the county almost instantly. People were used to being able to let their children play outside without a worry, as nothing ever happened in such a quiet place. But now, Rowan had vanished without a trace, and the police were unable to find her. For a whole day, the residents of Stella were in a state of panic. The first day of the search yielded no results. On November 4th, the police went to the neighboring town to speak with Christopher, who fully corroborated David's story. However, Christopher added that his friend hadn't even contacted him since that evening, and he had only just found out about Rowan's disappearance on the same day. The police expanded the search and involved even more volunteers, but they still couldn't find Rowan or any clues to her whereabouts. The next morning, the FBI joined the investigation while the local police continued to search for Rowan throughout the town and its surroundings. Detectives focused on exploring the possibility of abduction. They strongly doubted the stepfather's story, as it seemed highly questionable. Police also checked with all of Rowan's friends and confirmed that she hadn't visited any of them that night. Investigators continued to speak with David, and he changed certain details in his story several times, further raising suspicions against him. For instance, he gave conflicting timelines for his absence from home that night, and even said that perhaps Rowan hadn't asked him for permission to go to her friend's house and just left without his knowledge. FBI agents also discovered that on the night of her disappearance, David had asked his mother to borrow her car, a fact he had initially not disclosed to the police. As a result, they decided to seize both this car and his own pickup truck for examination, but experts were unable to uncover any evidence. Meanwhile, detectives decided to speak with Christopher and Nathan again, as they were both with David that evening. Police invited Christopher to the station. He repeated the same story as the day before. He also agreed to a polygraph test, which showed no signs of deception. Several hours after Christopher left the station and returned to work, he noticed Sheriff Clark's car and waved for him to stop. Sheriff Clark led the police department in their town called Witten and had known Christopher for 17 years since his childhood. The sheriff was friends with his foster parents, and Christopher always respected him. He often sought his advice or help in difficult times, such as when his mother passed away. Sheriff Clark approached Christopher, and they discussed Rowan's disappearance. The sheriff was aware of the case, but had not been involved in it, as the search was being handled by the Stella Department. During their conversation, the sheriff felt that Christopher's behavior was quite weird, and he suspected that Christopher might be withholding some information from him. Considering that Rowan's life was at stake and her fate remained unknown, Clark decided to share his suspicions with the FBI. He contacted the agents and told them about his concerns. Investigators assumed that Christopher might be withholding some significant information that could implicate Rowan's stepfather in her disappearance. Perhaps he had asked Christopher to lie and change certain details in the story of that evening, and now Christopher feared being implicated as an accomplice if he told the truth. Sheriff Clark informed the FBI agents that he had a close and trusting relationship with Christopher, so he offered to help persuade him to talk. That same evening, Christopher went to Colleen's house to ask her if there was any progress in the search. About the same time, FBI agents also arrived to speak with Rowan's mother again. When they saw Christopher there, they also asked him some questions, and he once again repeated that the events of that evening unfolded exactly as he had previously said. But then he mentioned for the first time that he did not rule out the possibility of David's involvement in her disappearance, and said that he wanted to help them uncover the truth, no matter how terrible it might be. He even suggested wearing a wire and going to talk to David to try to coax him into confessing. But at that point, the detectives decided not to resort to such tactics. Instead, they asked Christopher if he had any locations in mind where his friend could have hidden Rowan's body, and he named several places. The next morning, police set out to search these locations as well as continuing their search in the surrounding areas of Stella. FBI agents once again brought David for questioning, but he repeatedly denied any involvement. Detectives searched his home in an attempt to find any leads, but it turned up nothing. Meanwhile, Christopher went to the sheriff's office to speak with Clark and told him about his encounter with the FBI. During their conversation, the sheriff had a strong feeling that Christopher was still withholding something. After their meeting, he contacted the detectives again and told them that Christopher might be keeping some information that could likely help them prove David's involvement. FBI agents asked the sheriff to continue trying to persuade him to talk, based on the fact that Christopher had repeatedly contacted Clark to discuss the case with him. They believed he wanted to share important information, but for some reason, he was afraid to do so. The next day, on November 7th, the police called Christopher back to the station. They needed his consent to search his safe, located in David's house. Christopher had been living with him for several months when he temporarily didn't have a place of his own, and some of his belongings were still there. Christopher gave them his permission and also agreed to allow the police to search his trailer and his car. He also voluntarily provided them with a DNA sample and agreed to answer the detectives' questions again. They began questioning him about that evening, and once again asked him to confirm David's story. But this time, Christopher suddenly admitted that his friend's story wasn't entirely true. The investigators began pressing him to tell them what really happened, but this pressure only caused Christopher to become agitated. He said that if the police were going to treat him like a criminal and attempt to accuse him of involvement in Rowan's disappearance, he would not continue this conversation. After that, detectives had to end the interrogation, and Christopher left the station. That same evening, he went to Sheriff Clark and told him about it. He complained that the detectives were treating him like a suspect and said that he might need to hire a lawyer. The sheriff replied that it was his right, but asked him to understand that the police were just doing everything possible to find Rowan. In response, Christopher stated that he would no longer speak with them, and that if he wanted to share anything else, he would only speak with Clark. The sheriff continued to persuade Christopher to tell him everything he knew, and at some point, Christopher began to cry. He said that he always loved Rowan and would never harm her. During the time when he lived in David's house, he developed a close bond with Rowan and the other children. They began to treat him like a family member and even called him Uncle Christopher. The sheriff understood that Christopher was on the brink of revealing everything he knew. However, just as Christopher was about to speak, someone arrived at the police station, distracting Sheriff Clark for some time. Christopher left the office without sharing what he had intended to. Sheriff Clark reached out to the FBI again and told them about this conversation. He explained that Christopher was almost ready to disclose everything he knew, but cautioned that pushing him too hard might cause him to stop talking and get an attorney. Clark suggested giving Christopher some time to think it over, and the detectives agreed. The search for Rowan continued the next day, again with no luck, but everything changed on November 9th, a week after her disappearance. Search groups reached a remote area near a town called Powell, 10 miles from Stella. There, amidst fields and trees, they discovered a large pit in the ground. When they looked there, they found Rowan's body concealed under leaves and debris. She was missing all clothing below the waist, except for one sock. Medical experts found signs of strangulation and also determined that she had been sexually assaulted. Shortly after the body's discovery, FBI agents contacted Sheriff Clark and asked him to speak with Christopher again, hoping he would now reveal everything. Sheriff learned that earlier that morning, Christopher had visited the station when he wasn't there and informed other officers that he needed to speak urgently with Clark. The sheriff set out to search for Christopher, checking all the places where he might be, but the man was nowhere to be found. It continued until Christopher called Clark himself. He was clearly distressed and asked if he was being followed. He explained that after hearing the news about Rowan's body being found, he drove around town to clear his head and noticed a gray car tailing him. Sheriff Clark replied that he knew nothing about any surveillance and suggested meeting Christopher in person. When they met, Christopher was visibly nervous and expressed concern for his safety. He feared that after Rowan's body was discovered, he might be accused of murder, and someone might seek revenge against him. Clark took him to the station and said that now that the case had been classified as a homicide, it was time to reveal everything he knew. Christopher began crying again, and the sheriff asked him to tell what David had done to Rowan. In response, Christopher stated that there were too many people at the police station and he didn't want to discuss it there. He suggested going to a quieter place and mentioned a small bridge located a few miles from their town. Clark agreed, and they drove there together. As they got out of the car, Christopher unexpectedly raised his hands and said that the sheriff should handcuff him. The sheriff was surprised and replied that it wasn't necessary, but Christopher insisted, saying, "After what I tell you, you'll have to do it." After this, he began talking. Christopher repeated the first part of the story he had told the police many times. He, along with Nathan and David, went to his trailer where they continued drinking. Sometime later, his friends decided to head home, and David asked Nathan for a ride. They said they would take back roads to avoid the police and left. But then Christopher started telling something that shocked the sheriff to the core. He claimed that he wanted to sexually assault Rowan and quickly came up with a plan. Knowing his friends would take quite some time on the road through the fields, he got into his car and drove straight to David's house, taking the main highway. He entered Rowan's room, picked her up, and carried her to his car, doing it all so that she wouldn't wake up. After that, he took her to his trailer where he assaulted her. According to him, she only woke up at that moment and tried to resist, but she couldn't break free. Christopher didn't turn on the lights or speak to her because he didn't want Rowan to recognize him. After the crime, he planned to take her back home and leave, but things didn't go as planned. When he carried Rowan out of the trailer, the moon was shining brightly and she saw his face. Christopher panicked, grabbed a rope, and strangled her. When she passed away, he loaded her body into the car and started thinking about what to do next. At first, He wanted to dump her from the bridge, the same one where he stood with Sheriff Clark, but Christopher realized that her body would be found too quickly. So, he got behind the wheel and began driving around the county, considering other options. Soon, he remembered the large pit near the neighboring town and headed there. He dumped the body into the pit and tried to cover it with branches, but the pit was too large, so everything fell down. When he returned to the trailer, he found traces of Rowan's blood on his clothes and mattress. Christopher also realized he needed to get rid of her pants, underwear, and the rope he used to kill her. He collected all these items and placed them in a large barrel, intending to burn them. However, Christopher quickly realized that such a fire would definitely attract attention, so he dragged the barrel into the shed, closed the door, and started the fire there. Sheriff Clark was completely taken aback by this story. All this time, he thought David had committed the crime, and Christopher was just withholding some information. It was hard for him to believe that the man he had known for almost 20 years was capable of such brutality. Christopher himself had 3 young children, and although he didn't live with them after divorcing his wife, he always seemed like a decent man to him. But reality turned out to be way more chilling. After Christopher finished his story, he agreed to voluntarily go to the station, and the sheriff didn't handcuff him. Only after they arrived and the man repeated his confession to the FBI agents, he was arrested on charges of murder. Christopher also signed a voluntary consent to search his trailer and car. Ending his confession, he added that he regretted his actions and said that he cried like a baby all the next day. The detectives immediately went to speak with David and informed him that Christopher had confessed to the murder. Considering David's strange behavior and inconsistent statements, they suspected that he might have been covering for his friend. However, they were met with an even more shocking twist. When David was brought in for questioning, he suddenly changed his version of events. According to him, the night he returned home and found Rowan missing from her room, he realized that Christopher might have taken her. So, he took his mother's car and drove to his trailer. Upon entering, he saw the girl on the bed with Christopher leaning over her. Instead of rescuing Rowan, David decided to join in. He also sexually assaulted her. Then he helped his friend kill her and dispose of the body. David added that during the ordeal, his brain simply shut off, and he remembered nothing about the night for several days. The detectives, who were not expecting such a twist, went back to Christopher to confirm David's words. However, Christopher stated that his friend was not involved and that everything happened as he had told them. This further baffled the detectives, but Christopher's story matched the facts. Medical experts confirmed that the victim had been strangled with a thin rope, a detail only the killer would know. During a search of the trailer, the police found a barrel with ashes. In his car, they also discovered hair comparable to Rowan's. Despite investigators still being unable to confidently determine whose version of events was truthful, both men provided incriminating statements. So David was also arrested, and the cases were sent to court. During the trial, Christopher filed a motion to exclude all his statements from the case materials, claiming he was unaware they could be used against him and that the police violated his rights. But the judge denied this motion since all his conversations with investigators were entirely voluntary. Christopher also attempted to plead mitigating circumstances, pointing out his difficult childhood. From an early age, he was constantly shuffled between biological and foster parents, which greatly impacted him. Christopher also invited an expert who claimed he had signs of developmental issues, but none of this helped him avoid punishment. In 2012, 5 years after the murder, he was sentenced to death. He tried to appeal this sentence, but to no avail. As for David, the situation was much more complicated. He admitted to assaulting and killing Rowan, but there was one serious problem. His version contradicted Christopher's statements. If the prosecution decided to charge David with murder, it could potentially lead to Christopher's sentence being overturned, and David might also avoid responsibility. Considering there was no solid evidence against David, such as DNA, The prosecution could not take such a risk. In fact, they still weren't sure if he was involved at all. The prosecution did not rule out the possibility that David might have indeed committed the crime together with Christopher, but there was no evidence to support this theory. In the end, a difficult decision was made. To avoid the risk of Christopher's sentence being overturned, they reduced David's charges to much lighter ones. He pleaded guilty to 2 charges: child endangerment and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison, with a minimum of 5 years to be served behind bars. This sentence was met with outrage. If David was indeed involved in the murder, his punishment was deemed incomparable to the severity of the crime. However, there's nothing that can be done about it now, and it's unlikely that he will ever be tried again for this case. As for Christopher, he remains in prison awaiting execution. Considering that decades often pass between sentencing and execution, there are no guarantees that the death penalty will ever be carried out. It's quite possible that he will simply spend the rest of his life in prison. On July 4, 2009, several faculty members from the finance department of Chinese University gathered to work overtime. They needed to manage and track the school's finances and expenses from the previous semester. Among them was supposed to be 43-year-old Tan Chenghui, a faculty member whom many expected to be present. Yet, he was absent. A colleague known as Ma attempted to reach Chenghui on his mobile phone at 11 a.m. Unfortunately, there was no answer. Given the heavy workload, Ma couldn't get too concerned and initially wasn't worried. He knew that Chenghui's family had recently adopted a stray dog suffering from a skin disease. Chenghui had planned to take the dog to the vet, so Ma assumed that's where he might have been. On July 5th, the university's finance department held another meeting, but again Chenghui failed to show up. Ma tried calling his mobile phone once more, but still received no response. Not knowing Chenghui's landline number prevented further attempts at contact. By July 6th, Chenghui hadn't shown up for work for 2 days and had not communicated with any co-workers. Eventually, one colleague reported his absence to the university's finance department. Fortunately, his superiors knew Chenghui's house landline number and tried calling it, again with no success. Concerned about his prolonged absence, they reached out to the library where his 33-year-old wife, Tang Anyi, worked. According to library staff, she too was absent without having booked any days off. Originally from Zhongshan, in Guangdong province of mainland China, Chenghui and Tang Anyi were married for 11 years and had 2 daughters, 10-year-old Tan Zai and 7-year-old Tan Zai. Both daughters shared the same name. Although their living conditions were modest, they resided in an abandoned recycling station on Waju South Road. The family was described as kind-hearted and cheerful individuals whose children were well-behaved. Chenghui frequently took his daughters into town for leisure activities, which led some to speculate that perhaps the family decided on an impromptu vacation, but encountered unforeseen circumstances delaying their return. This unusual situation called for further investigation and warranted greater concern within their academic community. His colleagues spent a significant period repeatedly calling both his mobile and house phone, hoping for a different outcome. After some time, someone did answer. However, it was not a family member. Instead, an unfamiliar man with a middle-aged voice responded. He introduced himself as Chenghui's cousin, stating that the family had left for Dongduan in Guangdong province for summer vacation. According to him, Chenghui had entrusted his personal phone to him for safekeeping. When asked about the family's return to Hong Kong, the man was vague and eventually hung up after repeated questioning, then turned off the mobile phone. This call only heightened the suspicion and concern among Chenghui's co-workers. Chenghui had always been diligent and conscientious, never leaving work without a valid reason. If he were to take a vacation with his children, he would have arranged matters with their school beforehand. Additionally, the family cared for 9 stray dogs, raising questions about who would look after them during their trip to mainland China and how they could afford such a vacation. Chenghui had lived with his parents, His father was a sailor while his mother worked at a paper mill. His father's mysterious disappearance led to his mother's deteriorating health and eventual move to a nursing home. Cheng Hui regularly visited her weekly, making it out of character for him to suddenly abandon these responsibilities. Consequently, they decided to contact the police. One of his colleagues guided the police to Cheng Hui's residence, located at an abandoned recycling station in Pingqi village. On their way there, they noticed an unexpected event. A short man was seen near the Tan family's fence, but quickly vanished from sight. Initially dismissing this sighting as inconsequential, they proceeded to their destination. Upon reaching Cheng Hui's home gate, they discovered it locked. The police then surveyed the property and began questioning neighbors. The abandoned recycling station spans nearly 450 square meters, with only 90 square meters constructed upon. Around 350 square meters are unoccupied flower beds. The building itself was illegally constructed. The original owner had haphazardly built several tin houses on the premises for waste recycling purposes, while another stone structure functioned as a pig farm. Given that virtually no one resided there, the police found only one neighbor available for questioning, an elderly woman named Wang, who lived alone across the street. Wang mentioned she had resided in the area for quite some time and knew their daily schedules somewhat, particularly that they usually attended to their garden in the afternoons, but beyond this knowledge, she was not privy to details about their personal lives. She noted that, due to the remote location, relatives seldom visited the family. The only acquaintance she knew of was Cheng Hui's middle-aged cousin, who went by Zhu. Wang was not informed of any mentions of suicide. She only knew that Cheng Hui's uncle lived nearby in a stone house. A colleague of Cheng Hui told the police that when he called Cheng Hui's phone, it was answered by his cousin. The police assumed the person on the other end was Zhu. Wang didn't know Zhu's or the uncle's address, but she did hear cries for help from their house on July 5th. Consequently, officers were dispatched to conduct door-to-door inquiries in Pingqi village. Investigators later located a man at a stone house at 74 Huaju Road. He identified himself as 42-year-old Zhu Shenqi and confirmed he was Cheng Hui's cousin. He mentioned that he frequently visited the family home to assist with renovations and garden work. When questioned about the phone call, he insisted that the family was on vacation in China. According to him, Cheng Hui visited his mother at a nursing home on July 5th before returning home and informing him of his plan to travel to Dongguan, China for a few days. To avoid expensive roaming fees for his Hong Kong mobile phone in mainland China, he had asked Zhu Shenqi to keep it until he returned. The person observed by police and Cheng Hui's colleague leaving hurriedly was actually Zhu after feeding the family dogs. Zhu Shenqi appeared calm during his interaction with investigators. There were no notable inconsistencies in his account. When asked if he possessed a key to the family home, he said he did not. Despite locating Zhu Shenqi, police continued their door-to-door investigations. Some villagers claimed that a few days earlier, a stranger had borrowed money from a female villager and later had an intense confrontation where she threatened to collect the debt from Cheng Hui's home if unpaid when his mother was hospitalized since she owed money too. However, this stranger wasn't Zhu Shenqi. Nonetheless, speculation arose suggesting that perhaps the family went into hiding to evade debts and misled their cousin about their whereabouts in China. Or so they thought. When the police asked the villagers about Shenqi, that's when they learned he had lied. The villagers that Shenqi regularly visited the area to maintain and work on the home. He always managed to open the gate and door by himself, even when no one else was home. This led the police to conclude that he must have had a key or some kind access to the property. In fact, he did. Wang witnessed Cheng Hui hand over the key to Shenqi. This key was left at the university office, with instructions for Shenqi to pick it up. Wang also saw this exchange. The police then returned to Shenqi's home and asked for the key. Once again, he denied owning one and claimed he used a spare during renovations, which he supposedly returned, leaving him without access. Shanky appeared far less composed compared to his previous questioning sessions. He deliberately avoided key details. So when police threatened to search his home, Shanky panicked and suddenly remembered another house key he hadn't returned. He retrieved it from his dresser and handed it over to the authorities. Despite his suspicious behavior, there wasn't direct evidence linking him to the family's disappearance, so they put him under surveillance while continuing their investigation. Using this spare key, investigators entered the home, which was in complete disarray and had clearly been ransacked. They found several fresh bloodstains on the walls, indicating that someone had likely been killed on the property. In the kitchen, police discovered a sink full of dirty dishes, a clear contradiction to any claim that they had gone to China, as they would not have left their home in such a mess before leaving. Inside the couple's master bedroom, they found family ID cards in a dresser drawer. The head investigator contacted border crossing authorities, who confirmed that no member of the family had left Hong Kong. Continuing their search, they found a blood-stained shirt in a side room and a blood-stained plastic hollow water pipe in a corner of another room. Sniffer dogs were brought in for further clues. The dogs picked up a scent and found blood stains under freshly turned soil 99 meters away from the house. Despite it being summer vacation, it was known that Cyan and Zion, the daughters, had signed up for summer school classes, meaning they wouldn't be on vacation either. It became clear that foul play was involved concerning what happened to this family. Soon after, a dedicated task force was created specifically for investigating this case, but no further investigation took place immediately due to how late it was, so authorities just cordoned off Pingchi village's entrances and exits, while placing Shanky under house arrest as their primary suspect. Shanky soon admitted his actions. He stated he was from Huangpu, Guangdong province. He lived with his sister, wife, and 2 sons, aged 15 and who suffered from memory issues. Shanky previously made a living through motorcycle sales in Junction City. However, the 2006 ban on motorcycles in Guangdong affected his sales and income drastically. Struggling financially, he reached out to his cousin, Tan Changi, in Hong Kong for assistance in finding work there. Shang Hui managed to secure Shanky a construction job that paid a daily salary of 500 Hong Kong dollars with board and lodging included. After working for half a month, Shanky felt frustrated with his pay since company deductions left him with only 220 Hong Kong dollars. Annoyed and dispirited, he quit without notice and went back to China. In 2007, Typhoon Pabuk caused extensive damage to his home. Faced with hefty repair costs, Shanky sought employment help from Cheng Hui in Hong Kong again. This time, Shang Hui couldn't find available jobs but offered to pay Shanky from his own salary if Shanky helped work on Hui's home. Shanky accepted the offer. Under this deal, every other month, Shanky would travel to Hong Kong for various tasks around the household like gardening and repairs. As per Shanky's account, an affair began between him and Cheng Hui's wife during this period. On July 3rd, Cheng Hui discovered the affair. On July 5th, while visiting a nursing home with Cheng Hui's wife to see her mother-in-law, Shanky snuck back home to continue the affair. Cheng Hui unexpectedly returned early and furiously confronted him. According to Shanky, seeing murderous intent in Cheng Hui's eyes drove him to desperation. He grabbed a 25-centimeter fruit knife and fatally stabbed Cheng Hui repeatedly until he fell into a pool of blood. Shanky was understandably frightened by what had just occurred and intended to report it to the authorities. Nevertheless, Shanky mentioned he couldn't allow that to transpire, so since he couldn't convince Cheng Hui's wife, he resolved to eliminate her as well. He located some wires in the room's corner, rushed at her, knocked her down, bound her hands behind her back, her mouth and nose with tape, and a plastic bag over her head. Meanwhile, their 2 children were in a bedroom watching cartoons. She screamed for them to flee, but instead, they ran towards their mother and found their father deceased and Shanky in the process of killing their mother. They retreated to their room, crying and locking the door. Given she was already restrained, Shanky left Cheng Hui's wife momentarily and pursued the children. Their cries were overheard by a neighbor. Using a pair of pliers, Shenki forced open the door and tied their hands behind their backs with wires too, taped over their mouths and noses, and covered their heads with plastic bags as well. Returning to Cheng Hui's wife after securing the children, who also soon suffocated, he found she had finally stopped breathing. After killing the entire family, Shenki was uncertain about his next steps. He went back home to ponder his options. Shenki considered that hiding the bodies in a ditch or water might make them too easily discoverable, and that dismembering them would be very taxing and time-consuming. He decided on burying them on their own property instead. On July 6th, Shenki returned to the house intending to clean up as many bloodstains as possible before digging a hole deep and wide enough for 4 bodies. He quickly placed all 4 family members inside it, along with the murder tools. Sharp knife, water pipe, iron pliers, then covered it all up. The police were skeptical about his motives but believed his account overall. They escorted Shenki back to the scene where he identified for them where he'd buried everything used for committing these crimes. On July 7th, they contacted the fire department for assistance with exhuming the remains. The firefighters arrived equipped with excavation tools and wore gas masks since the bodies were near a septic tank. They commenced digging but soon encountered an issue. They hit cement. Shenki, during his confession, omitted a key detail. He had filled the pit with cement before covering it back up. The thickness of the cement was unknown, and it had hardened, rendering their tools ineffective in breaking through. Consequently, the police brought in a private engineering company. This company utilized high-grade tools to begin drilling through the concrete. However, the engineering team had weak stomachs. Upon drilling through and discovering human hair, they lost their nerve and refused to continue, as they did not wish to see a dead body. The police took 13 hours to convince them to proceed. Once fully excavated, they found the pit measured 2.54 meters wide and 6 feet deep. At the bottom lay the 4 bodies of the family members, barefoot and clad in just t-shirts and shorts. Cheng Hui's body was at the very bottom, with his hands and feet bound by electric wire and multiple stab wounds on his abdomen, back and neck. His clothes were stained with blood. And Enzio's knees, hands, and feet were also tied up with electric wire. A wire was wrapped around her neck, while her mouth and nose were sealed with yellow tape. Zion's mouth and nose were covered with tape, her hands and feet were bound, her face appeared distorted. Similarly, Xiaowang's face was contorted, her hands and feet were tied up, her mouth and nose sealed, her eyes were covered with transparent tape. Both Enzio and Enzio displayed no overt signs of trauma, leading police to believe they might have been buried alive. Shenki was formally arrested and during interrogation altered his confession. He retracted his initial claim about an affair but admitted attempting to initiate one. And Enzio felt uncomfortable and informed Cheng Hui about Shenki's behavior. Enraged, Cheng Hui expelled Shenki from their home and prohibited him from returning. Subsequently, Shenki revisited the home to apologize, surprisingly receiving Cheng Hui's forgiveness. On July 3rd, Shenki resumed work at their home when it appeared that their relationship had mended until July 4th, when he again made advances towards an Enzio during Cheng Hui's absence. Attempting to escalate this time by trying to molest an auteur, an Enzio led her to flee and call for help as she locked herself in a room for safety, to avoid alarming neighbors. In response, and likely panic, Shenki fled the scene in anger. On July 5th, Shenki waited for Cheng Hui to visit his mother at the nursing home. His intention was to force his way into the family home once more, under the pretense of delivering a second apology. Cheng Hui, anticipating such an attempt, wisely returned home early. Upon arrival, he found Shenki on the property, attempting to gain entry to speak with an Enzio again. This encounter quickly escalated into an argument. In a heated, Shenki stabbed Cheng Hui, not in self-defense but voluntarily. The remainder of Shenki's confession aligned with his initial statements, but included the added detail of filling the makeshift grave with cement. Yet, after the bodies were examined during autopsy, it became evident that Shenki's accounts were incomplete. Cheng Hui's murder was far more savage than described. He had sustained 9 stab wounds to his head and neck, and nearly 80 on his body. Additionally, there were 10 stab wounds on his hands and feet. Rather than being suffocated with a plastic bag, as initially claimed, both Cheng Hui and Zion had been strangled. Forensic analysis of the home revealed that none of the cutlery or dishes held the family's DNA. Instead, they bore only Shanky's DNA. It was concluded that Cheng Hui had not been murdered in the kitchen, but likely elsewhere in the house. And Enzio did not become aware of these events until she herself was attacked by Shanky next. Furthermore, the weapon used was not from the family's kitchen, but one belonging to Shanky himself. The cement used for concealing the bodies had been purchased ahead of time, indicating forethought and planning. The investigation also uncovered evidence that Enzio's bank cards had been used at ATMs following her death. However, failed attempts to guess her PIN prevented any money from being withdrawn. Moreover, their cash and bank cards were discovered missing, pointing towards robbery as a motive and solidifying premeditation. Throughout this process, whenever discrepancies in his story were highlighted by police officers, Shanky swiftly provided new versions of events. He explained that urgent repairs were needed for his ancestral home in China, amounting to $100,000 in cash, while maintaining financial support for 2 children still at school there as well, both which necessitated significant funds. Because he lacked local favorability back home, it meant borrowing money would likely be denied, and visits previously made to Hong Kong hadn't yielded substantial earnings either. Hence, ultimately turning towards seeking assistance from Cheng Hui seemed like necessary recourse under such pressing circumstances, according to him. Shanky harbored the belief that Cheng Mi was far wealthier than he seemed and was exploited for cheap labor. On July 3rd, Shanky returned to Hong Kong without informing anyone. He waited until July 5th, when the couple didn't have to work. Concealing a knife, Shanky knocked on the door while Cheng Hui was away at the nursing home. They talked briefly. When Cheng Hui returned and saw Shanky, he asked if there was anything he needed. As they conversed, Annie went to the kitchen. Almost immediately, Shanky asked to borrow 100,000 Hong Kong dollars. Cheng Hui declined because, although he had the money, and even more, he needed it for his mother's treatment and daughter's education. Shanky refused to believe him and accused him of exploiting him for cheap labor. This accusation angered Cheng Hui, who then ordered Shanky to leave. As Cheng Hui turned his back, Shanky attacked him, covering his mouth before stabbing him from behind. He then restrained a terrified Ani and Jiang Wang, searched the home for cash and bank cards, and demanded their passwords. Although Cheng Hui provided a fake password, at that moment, Shanky didn't realize it. Despite this lie about strangling Annie and claiming he killed them by putting tape over their mouths and noses, as well as using plastic bags over their heads, this part being untrue, when Shanky left for the nearest ATM, he found out he had been lied to when the PIN number didn't work. Upon his return home, he discovered they had all suffocated in his absence. Noticing the food Ani had been preparing, he decided to eat it near the 4 corpses while contemplating how to dispose of them. After stealing 6,000 Hong Kong dollars from Cheng Hui's person, he buried the bodies and tools in a small pit before retiring to sleep at his temporary residence. The next morning, he awoke with the grim realization that the bodies might be detected due to the smell seeping from the soil. So he decided to buy cement from a store. After returning home, he dug up the pit he had previously made and poured in the cement before refilling the hole again. He planned to stay at the house for a while to answer calls to Cheng Hui's cell phone or house phone, pretending that he was asked to look after things while they were supposedly on vacation. Shanky mentioned he did not anticipate his deception being uncovered so quickly. Even now, Shanky continued lying about various details, such as claiming he bought the cement before the murder and fabricating causes of Annie and Jiang's deaths. The police, by this point, were no longer interested in extracting a truthful confession since they felt they had sufficient evidence to proceed. The trial took place at the Hong Kong High Court on October 28, 2010. Shanky pleaded not guilty. Maintaining his earlier story about an affair with Annie, he asserted that Cheng Hui was killed in self-defense and claimed Annie and Jiang died accidentally. According to him, he only confessed to extorting the family and killing them for financial reasons because he was coerced by police through beatings and suffocation until he surrendered the confession they wanted. On November 23rd, the jury delivered their verdict, unanimously finding him guilty of murdering Cheng Hui while acquitting him of Jiang's murder, but convicting him of manslaughter instead. On this charge, the jury split 5-2. This distinction proved inconsequential because Shanky received a life sentence for 3 counts of murder and 1 count of manslaughter. The presiding judge condemned Shanky's lack of conscience, calling him worse than a beast and unrepentant. He accused Shanky of concocting both his self-defense tale and affair with Annie solely to tarnish their reputations posthumously, rather than secure a reduced sentence. Interestingly, despite widespread condemnation, Shanky's family sided with him. They accused Cheng Hui of being hypocritical, a true villain who exploited Shanky financially by pocketing his earnings and using him for cheap labor. These claims sparked outrage among Pingqi village residents, leading Shanky's family to move back to China to escape backlash. This crime was among Hong Kong's most shocking incidents. It spurred an outpouring of support toward Cheng Hui's family, as many visited their home offering condolences, while netizens raised ample funds for funeral expenses. The family's 9 stray dogs also found new homes when another family adopted them, each year on July 5th. They would take these dogs for walks near their former owner's residence in Pingqi village as tribute. On August 9, 2022, at age 55, Shanky passed away in Hong Kong's Stanley Prison due to liver cancer. Every relationship of a person is based on the pillar of trust, whether it's between parents and children, husband and wife, or even between boyfriend and girlfriend. But if someone breaks the trust of another person in these essential relationships and starts thinking badly about them, it feels really terrible. And today's case is somewhat similar, where a boy and a girl from Pakistan were very happy in their relationship. But then, after some time, the girl breaks up because she started seeing a dark side of her boyfriend. But then, what the boy did with his girlfriend shook the entire Pakistan. Shaukat Ali Muqaddam was not only a normal citizen of Pakistan, but also a diplomat and ambassador of Pakistan. Due to this, he had to live in different countries. However, in 2021, he was living in Islamabad, Pakistan. Apart from this, at one point, Shaukat Ali had also been Pakistan's ambassador to South Korea and Kazakhstan. Because of this, he held a very high position in Pakistan. There were a total of 5 people in his family, including Shaukat Muqaddam, his wife Kausar Muqaddam, 2 daughters and 1 son. October 23, 1993, was the day when a beautiful girl was born in Shaukat Ali's house, whom they named Noor. Noor was a healthy and cute baby who always laughed and never bothered anyone too much. Although Shaukat's professional life was very busy and stressful, but when he came home, he spent quality time with his family. As a result, his children had a very good upbringing. From school days, Noor had a great interest in studying. She always used to read either school books or other books. Now, because Shaukat Muqaddam was a diplomat, he used to get transferred to other countries due to his work, which is why Noor started her schooling from Ireland. Then she completed high school from South Korea. After South Korea, the family moved to Kazakhstan, but Noor thinks about completing her college in the US, where her older sister Sarah also lived. However, after the US, Noor returned to Pakistan, Islamabad. As humble and smart as Noor was in her childhood, she was equally humble and smart in her adult years. That's why everyone at home trusted Noor and easily accepted her decisions. Besides, Noor loved animals, especially stray dogs and cats. She used to feed them whenever she had time. Although Noor belonged to a wealthy family, she never had a liking for materialistic things. By hearing all these things, you must have understood that Noor was a kind-hearted, down-to-earth, intelligent, and confident girl. Along with all these things, Noor also had a great passion for art and calligraphy. She often made religious paintings too. As I mentioned, coming from a wealthy diplomat family, parties were a common occurrence at the diplomats' homes. So Shaukat Muqaddam often took his family to such parties because they were excellent for networking and building connections. It was at one such party in 2018 that Noor met a boy named Zahir Jaffer. Zahir and Noor are both going to be key characters in this case. So before we proceed, let's take a brief look at Zahir's background. Zahir Jaffer was born in the USA, but he spent his childhood and teenage years in Pakistan. After that, Zahir pursued his graduation in the US and also spent some time living in the UK. Zahir's father was Zakir Jaffer, who was a very successful businessman. Due to his father's business ventures, the Jaffer family was one of the wealthiest families in Pakistan. The Jaffer family had various businesses, including healthcare, oil, real estate, and construction. This also provided them with opportunities to work with their country's military. One of these companies is Ahmed Jaffer and Company, where Zahir Jaffer is now the CEO, while his father, Zakir Jaffer, used to oversee the company. But after some time, Zahir's mood changed, and he started working as a therapist at a company called Therapy Works. In this company, Zahir used to listen to the children of the school and explain to them about mental health care. He also used to arrange lectures and presentations for the children. But the shocking thing here is that Zahir himself was an introverted and angry since childhood. He also had very few friends, and he rarely attended parties with them. But it is at one such party that he meets Noor, and he likes her, and Noor also enjoys talking to Zahir. Perhaps this happened because their personalities were different, and people say that opposite personalities are attracted to each other. However, both their families already knew each other because they used to attend such parties, but friendship between Noor and Zahir developed from this party. Then, after some time, this friendship turned into love, and they both entered into a romantic relationship. However, it's not like they kept this fact hidden from their parents or friends. Rather, both their families and friends knew that Zahir and Noor were dating. Both families were happy because Noor completes Zahir and Zahir completes Noor. Actually, Noor brought out a side of Zahir that no one had seen before, whereas Zahir used to be very introverted before. But as soon as he met Noor, his personality began to change gradually. He started enjoying his life, hanging out with people, and at one party, people were surprised to see Zahir dancing with Noor, including Zahir's family, because they had never thought they would see this side of Zahir's personality. Everything was going well, but as the relationship grew older, things started to deteriorate. Initially, everything was going well in the relationship. Both were enjoying themselves, and their families were also very happy. But then, after some time, a different side of Zahir came out in front of Noor. Actually, Noor later finds out that Zahir is a very aggressive and abusive man. Allegedly, Zahir had physically and mentally abused Noor several times. Not only that, Zahir had also raised his hand against his own mother before. As a result, after almost 3 years of relationship, when Noor couldn't bear Zahir anymore, she broke up with him at the beginning of 2021. In both families, there was dissatisfaction over their children ending the relationship. Because neither of them was a normal family, and in such affluent households, it's not typical for a boy and a girl to enter a relationship, break up shortly after, and then enter into a relationship with someone else later. In fact, people like them also see relationships as a business. Like most wealthy families, they marry off their sons or daughters where they can profit. But besides that, Zahir was also displeased that Noor left him, and now he took it as an affront to his male ego. However, after some time, Zahir also started thinking about moving on, and then he thought he would go back to the US and settle there because he also had US citizenship along with Pakistani citizenship. Before moving forward, quickly subscribe to the channel. This is strange. You haven't subscribed to the channel yet. Quickly subscribe to it. Now let's jump to July 18th, 2021. On this day, Zahir booked a taxi to go to Islamabad International Airport. Actually, according to Pakistan Standard Time, Zahir's flight to New York was at 3:50 a.m. on July 19th. He had already packed his bags and informed his family about it. But before leaving, he wanted to meet Noor just once, so he called Noor on the evening of July 18th. At that time, Noor was at her home, preparing for Eid with her family. Now, Zahir called Noor and requested, "I am leaving this country for New York, and I will never come back here again, but I will settle in the US, so please meet me once before I leave." Additionally, Zahir told Noor, "Come to my house, we'll meet, and then when I leave for the airport from my house, I'll drop you off at your home first." Although these two had already broken up, before that they had been in a relationship for 3 years, which led Noor to say yes to meeting Zahir. After that, at 9:05 p.m., Noor leaves her house. But she doesn't tell her family that she's going to Zahir's house. She just says she's going to her friend's house and will be back soon. Around 10 p.m., Noor arrives outside Zahir's house at the scent location in Sector F74. But strange things start happening from here. Now, as I told you, Zahir's flight was at 3:50 a.m., but between 10 and 11 p.m., Zahir calls his travel agency multiple times. Zahir called his travel agency and started asking them very strange questions like, "What would happen if I don't board this flight? Will I get my refund back? If I decide to book tickets again after 10 days, what will happen?" Sometime later, Zahir called his travel agency again and said that now I'm not canceling my ticket, but I've decided to go to the US on this flight. But let me tell you, during this time, Noor was inside his house with him. But for her, this house was a new place because she had never been here before. Afterward, the taxi that Zahir had booked to go to the airport also arrives outside Jathar's house at exactly 11 p.m. However, Zahir doesn't come out of the house for half an hour. Meanwhile, the taxi driver called Zahir 2 or 3 times, but Zahir told him to wait, saying, "I'll be there in just 5 minutes." However, at 12:07 a.m., he calls the taxi driver again and says, "My plan to go to the airport is canceled now. Anyway, if we leave for the airport now, I won't be able to catch my flight." Despite waiting for more than an hour, Zahir pays the taxi driver half the fare. Actually, Zahir had booked this taxi for 2,000 Pakistani rupees. Now, after that, the taxi driver leaves from there. But at 1:40 a.m., Zahir calls the taxi driver again and asks him to come back to his house. Now, the taxi driver also returns to Zahir's house because he knew he would get the full payment. But this time too, Zahir made the taxi driver wait outside the house for a few minutes, and then at 2:15 a.m., Zahir comes out with his luggage. But the strange thing this time was that Noor was also with him, and she didn't have sandals on her feet, which the driver found very strange. However, what struck him as even strange was that Zahir was talking to Noor during the car ride, but Noor wasn't responding to his words. Although the driver didn't pay much attention to this at the time, halfway through, Zahir told the driver, "Now take the car back towards home anyway. We're already very late. I don't think we'll make it to the airport on time and catch the flight." After that, the taxi driver drops them off again at Jaffar's house at 2:35 a.m. But as soon as Noor got out of the taxi, Zahir pulled her inside the house. According to the taxi driver's statement, he felt like Noor wasn't supposed to go back inside the house with Zahir, but Zahir forcefully took her inside. Then, on July 19th, Noor stayed at Zahir's house the whole day, and then July 20th arrived, which was the day of Eid. Noor had come to Zahir's house to meet him on July 18th at 9:05 p.m., but now it had been more than 24 hours, and Noor's father and mother had returned home after shopping for Eid. But when they find out that their daughter has been missing from home for 24 hours, at 12:57 a.m. on July 20th, Shaukat Muqaddam texts his daughter, asking her where she is. However, Noor doesn't reply to that text message. Then, at 5:48 a.m., Noor's mother messages her, and 2 family friends also call Noor, yet there is no response from Noor. This causes worry for Noor's parents, and they were about to inform the police about it. But at 10:43 a.m., Noor sends a voice recording to her mother. However, the contents of that recording were never made public, but it was the last time Noor's mother, Kausar Muqaddam, heard her daughter's voice. But after sending the voice message, another strange thing happens. Zahir immediately calls Noor's mother from his own phone and tells her that Noor is not at his house, trying to prove that he hasn't even seen Noor. Then, from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. that same day, Zahir repeatedly calls his father, Zakir Jaffer. However, at around 7:10 p.m., Noor is seen on CCTV cameras. But by that time, her condition was very bad, and it seemed as though Zahir had tortured her severely. In the CCTV footage, Noor is seen jumping from the balcony of Zahir's house on the first floor and falling directly onto an iron grill. This caused her to sustain an injury to her abdomen, which is why she is seen holding her stomach in this clip. She was actually distressed by Zahir's harassment and wanted to leave the house. However, the security guard closed the gate, and meanwhile Zahir also jumps from the balcony to catch Noor and brings her back inside. But as he was bringing her back, Noor falls down, but Zahir drags her inside. Now, I should tell you that it wasn't just Zahir and Noor inside the house. There was also a security guard, a cook, and a gardener. But none of them helped Noor. In fact, from July 18th to July 20th, Noor attempted to escape from this house 6 times. But each time, one of Zahir's servants informed him, and Noor was always caught. But this time, because of Noor's attempt to escape, Zahir becomes very angry. After bringing Noor back inside, he calls his father once again around 7:30 p.m. But since then, Zahir didn't call anyone for 30 minutes, because in the meantime, Zahir first attempts to shoot Noor with his handgun, but as soon as he presses the trigger, his gun jams. However, even after that, Zahir doesn't stop wanting to kill Noor. It was already in his mind. So he takes out a Swiss knife and starts stabbing every part of Noor's body. Meanwhile, Noor scratches Zahir's face and arms with her nails, but after some time, Noor's condition deteriorates so much that she faints. Noor was unconscious, but even then, Zahir kept stabbing her with the knife. Afterward, he grabbed Noor by the throat and keeps squeezing until Noor's last breath is gone. Later, Noor's post-mortem report reveals that she died due to lack of oxygen, but before killing Noor, Zahir ripped her several times. But Zahir didn't stop there. After Noor's death, he pulled out his knife and started cutting Noor's throat, and finally, he severed her head from her body. After killing Noor, Zahir quickly calls his father and friends, saying, "Thieves have broken into our house, and I need help." At the same time, some of Zahir's friends head towards his house. However, Zahir's father wasn't there. That's why he called the CEO of the company where Zahir worked, named Therapy Works, and said, "Quickly go to my house and save my son at any cost." In reality, Zahir's father, Zakir Jaffer, called the CEO of that company because they needed to erase all evidence of Noor's murder by going to Zahir. Moreover, the CEO of the company had to comply because Zahir's father was funding the company. Around 8:30 p.m., Tahir Zahur, the CEO of Therapy Works, arrives outside Zahir's house with his 6 employees. Additionally, some of Zahir's friends were also present. However, the door of Zahir's house remained closed, so Tahir took a ladder and, with his employees, entered through the window on the first floor. But as soon as they reached the first floor, Zahir attacked one of the employees with a knife, piercing through his chin and tongue. Zahir was extremely angry at that moment, so 5 to 6 people quickly grabbed him to control him. After this, Zahir's hands were tied behind his back, and ropes were also tied around his feet. But as soon as the people went inside Zahir's room from the balcony, they were stunned. In fact, there was blood everywhere on the floor, even on the walls of the room. Then they saw Noor's body in the center of the room, but her head was 3 feet away from her body. Now, everyone inside the room was astonished to regain control over Zahir, and after seeing Noor's dead body. But in the meantime, the neighbors were also quite alert, because when Zahir was being caught, he was screaming a lot, which made his neighbors call the police. After that, the police arrived there, and then on July 20th, around 10 o'clock at night, the police called Shavkat Muqaddam to inform him that his daughter had been murdered. Hearing this sad news, Muqaddam's family home was engulfed in mourning, because their youngest and dearest daughter was no longer in this world. But Noor's family knew who had done all this, and now they wanted to punish Zahir according to Pakistan law, meaning the death penalty. After that, the police arrested Zahir, but now they were worried about how Zahir would confess his crime. But Zahir did something very strange here too. As soon as the police caught Zahir, he confessed in a short while that he was the one who had killed Noor, and he had done so because he loved Noor very much. He had even proposed marriage to Noor, but she had rejected his marriage proposal and later broke up with him. This hurt Zahir's ego, so he booked his and Noor's one-way tickets to New York for July 19th. But before this, Zahir had decided that if Noor agreed to go to New York with him, they would get married and settle in New York. But if Noor didn't agree, he would kill her. However, from July 18th to 20th, Zahir tried to convince Noor for marriage, but when Noor refused to marry him, Zahir finally assaulted her very brutally. Although all the servants in Zahir's house knew what Zahir did with Noor, none of them tried to stop him even once, not even daring to call the police, because they were afraid that if they did, Zahir would not spare them. Now, even though Zahir had confessed his crime in front of the police, when the case went to court, he was behaving strangely in court. Firstly, he entered the court looking disheveled as if he hadn't bathed for days. Besides, he shouted loudly in the courtroom, even abusing the judge. Furthermore, the police had to drag him into the court and out of the court forcefully. However, he was doing all these things to prove that he is mentally unstable, and because of this, he should be spared from the death penalty for the murder of Noor. If it were proven that Zahir is mentally unstable, then firstly, his punishment would be reduced, and secondly, he would escape the death penalty. Actually, Zahir had schizophrenia, and he wanted to take advantage of it by telling the court that he is mentally unfit. Actually, schizophrenia is a serious mental illness in which a person is mostly lost in the world of imagination and knows very little about the real world. Because of this, he often behaved strangely. But when Zahir's medical examination was done, the report clearly stated that Zahir is mentally fit, and whatever he did with Noor, he did it consciously. But this made it clear that Zahir was an abuser and an aggressive person. Besides, there were many harassment cases against Zahir in both the US and Pakistan. In this case, during the ongoing trial in court, the entire Pakistan raised its voice for justice for Noor. Rallies and marches were held every day. As a result, on February 24, 2022, Noor received justice, and Zahir was sentenced to 2 death penalties, one for physically assaulting Noor and the other for her murder. Additionally, his 2 house staff, Iftikhar and Mohammed Jan, were also sentenced to 10 years in jail. Looking at the photos, you wouldn't know much, but Zahir was a powerful, tall, and aggressive man with whom a sweet and innocent girl, Noor, spent almost 48 hours. And those 48 hours were nothing less than hell for her. So with this, the Noor Muqaddam murder case comes to an end right here. If you